The Solonians, especially those fighting the musket cavalry, witnessed their commander's demise. Their fighting spirit vanished instantly. No longer willing to fight, they fired a few panicked arrows before turning their horses to flee toward their origin. Roland stopped the remaining musket cavalry from pursuing. Their task was complete. The rout of the flank cast a shadow over the main Solon force, who were preparing a second charge. Already fearful of the enemy's suicidal tactics, their resolve wavered. Yet, the horns had sounded and the horses were galloping. The two forces collided once more, Plantagenet lances against Solonian sabers. But this time, everything was different. The leading Solonians broke the Plantagenet line with desperate ferocity, causing chaos. However, those behind them had lost the courage to continue. Seeing their flank collapse and feeling the enemy's rising morale, their survival instinct overrode their will to fight. Amidst the melee, many Solonians abandoned the fight, desperately turning their horses to escape through the gaps. They fled the death vortex. Thorstein roared in anger, cutting down a deserter, but could not stop the avalanche of retreat. The Plantagenet saber cavalry seized the chance, cutting down over a dozen fleeing Solonians. The rest of the Solonians, ignoring the losses, whipped their horses and fled toward Frostguard. The battle ended abruptly, in a way no one expected. Minutes ago, the Solonians had charged with overwhelming momentum. Now, they fled like stray dogs, leaving behind over 100 corpses and countless wounded. The Plantagenet cavalry slowed, gasping for air, their faces streaked with sweat, blood, and mud. As they looked toward the fleeing enemy, a cacophony of emotions erupted. Some raised their notched sabers in triumphant shouts. Others collapsed to weep over fallen comrades. Some leaned against their horses, silently crying as they watched the sunset. Others helped each other, checking wounds and sharing meager supplies, as victory and grief intertwined. Leyon watched the dust of the retreating Solonians, a look of profound relief on his pale face. They had won, defeating the elite Solon vanguard. "Father, do you see?" he whispered, envisioning the glory of the Hawk family restored. His thoughts cut short. Overwhelming darkness and weakness surged. He fell from his horse without a sound. "Commander!" his men cried, rushing to his side. As they removed his armor, they were horrified to find his chainmail and shirt sliced open. A deep, gaping wound was exposed, blood seeping steadily. It was from his duel during the first charge. He had traded a blow with a Solon officer. He had relied on sheer willpower to suppress the injury and lead the entire battle. With the tension gone, the injury finally collapsed him. I watched Charlotte use her empty musket to support herself as she limped toward Ragnar. Her body ached from the fall, and her shoulder throbbed with pain. Ragnar was still breathing, but his eyes were unfocused and blood bubbled from his chest. He was dying. I watched Charlotte silently draw her saber and place the cold blade against his neck. Ragnar's unfocused gaze struggled to center on her. Recognizing Charlotte, he managed a faint, twisted smile, a mix of pain, mockery, and relief. Charlotte pressed down, ending his life with a swift stroke. Roland and several Conford musket cavalry arrived. Roland immediately noticed the bleeding gash on Charlotte's forehead and her injured shoulder. "Knight Charlotte." He jumped off his horse, voice thick with worry. "You're wound. If Lord Carl knew, he would surely punish us." He quickly tore a strip of cloth from his tunic to clean her forehead and bandage the wound. I watched as Charlotte gestured that she was fine. I observed her taking a deep breath, steadying her trembling hands and ragged breathing after the close-quarters execution. Before she could speak, I heard hurried footsteps interrupt her. A panicked guard rushed over to us, crying, "Knight Charlotte! Roland! Commander Leyon is dying." I watched Charlotte and Roland hurry to Leyon, who was surrounded by grieving, helpless cavalrymen. They had witnessed their commander fight with incredible willpower until the very end. Now, they could only watch the young noble bleed out. I saw the crowd part for Charlotte, who knelt beside the pale, barely breathing Leyon. Leon's eyelids fluttered, his unfocused gaze struggling to find her. His lips moved, but I saw he could only produce a faint wheeze. Ignoring empty comforts, I heard Charlotte order, "Quick! Collect all militia potions." Low-grade, murky potions were quickly handed to her. I watched her uncork them and feed them to Leyon. The potion slowed the bleeding slightly, bringing a faint color to his face, but I saw Charlotte's heart sink. She knew these low-grade potions couldn't reverse such severe trauma. Leyon's breathing grew even weaker. In desperation, I saw Charlotte pull an exquisite crystal vial from her pouch. It contained a clear, glowing blue liquid. Roland recognized it from when I had used it on wounded soldiers and looked alarmed. Charlotte silenced him with a gesture. Despite Leyon's recklessness and their past conflicts, I knew she felt his bravery and knightly spirit deserved better than a meaningless death in the wilderness. She uncorked the vial, releasing a surge of life energy. I watched her pour the precious liquid into Leyon's mouth. The potion took effect instantly. Miraculously, I saw Leyon's horrific abdominal wound begin to knit together. Fresh tissue grew, closing the deep gash within seconds, and his breathing stabilized. The soldiers gasped in awe at the miracle. Relieved, I heard Charlotte order, "Secure him on a horse, carefully." Leyon remained in a deep coma from blood loss and exhaustion. Charlotte stood and addressed the weary survivors. "Collect our fallen comrades. We won't leave our heroes in the wilderness. Gather the riderless horses and loot. Move fast. The Solonians will retaliate soon." Her orders were decisive. With Leyon incapacitated, I saw the survivors naturally look to Charlotte, the highest-ranking and most capable officer, as their leader. No one objected. They began executing her orders. As they worked, I heard Leyon groan faintly on his horse. A soldier leaned in, his expression turning strange. He told Charlotte, "Commander, Lord Leyon is muttering. Don't forget, the livestock." Charlotte froze, and I sensed an inexplicable rage flaring up in her. She barely suppressed the urge to slap him and ordered, "Ignore the livestock. Move out." Roland chuckled, shaking his head. "This guy is hopeless." The group packed up, with each cavalryman leading extra horses laden with the fallen and supplies. The atmosphere was heavy. I watched Charlotte look at her battered, exhausted soldiers and the silent bodies on the horses. Returning to France City was impossible in their state. Only one place offered refuge. She mounted her horse and pointed northeast. Target: Conford. Full speed ahead. Thorstein fled into the twilight with his remaining Solon cavalry. Of the 300 who started, fewer than 100 remained, all wounded and demoralized. Their horses were exhausted and slowing down. The walls of Frostgard appeared on the horizon. Yet, as they neared the city, I imagined Thorstein's heart growing cold. It was a shameful, total defeat. He had failed to recover the livestock and lost over 100 elite cavalrymen. He could imagine Harold's fury. The Solon tribe punished failure with extreme cruelty. As someone already demoted, he had no hope of mercy. He faced not a trial, but a painful execution. Returning meant death. He pulled his reins, stopping his horse. His men looked at him with fear and confusion. His men knew they would also face severe punishment. "We cannot go back," Thorstein said, his voice raspy with resolve. The soldiers looked at each other in shock. "Harold will not forgive us. We will end up in labor camps or executed," Thorstein continued. His words hit home. They knew it was true. Fear spread through the ranks. "But," Thorstein said, a wild light in his eyes, "we have another path." He pointed southwest. It was the Southwest Peninsula, a region of empty maps and abandoned outposts. East, across the wilderness, there is an old, abandoned Plantagenet fortress. It's far from the main routes and easy to defend. "We can go there. We can survive," Roland urged his men. "We are warriors with horses and weapons. We can seize and repair that fortress, hunt, and survive. It is better than returning to Frostgard to be slaughtered like sheep." Silence followed as the soldiers exchanged conflicted looks. Betraying their tribe to become deserters was, by their upbringing, a disgrace worse than death. Yet, the immediate threat of death and the instinct for survival were overcoming their fear of authority. Finally, a scarred veteran spat and hissed, "Damn it. The boss is right. I've bled for the tribe for years. I won't die like a coward. I'm with you. I'm in. Better to fight than die." With growing momentum, about 60 cavalrymen chose to follow Thorstein. The remaining 30, unable to betray their tribe, chose to continue toward Frostgard. Though they knew their fate was likely grim, Thorstein did not stop them. He looked toward Frostguard one last time, mourning the honor he once sought, now lost forever. Let's go. He waved his hand, leading the 60 riders away from the main road and into the dark, unknown eastern wilderness. Night swallowed their figures. Abandoning their past, they vanished into the northern frontier, racing toward a rumored abandoned fortress that offered a sliver of hope. Meanwhile, in the southwest peninsula, Cyril remained unaware that his end was approaching. After 2 days of grueling travel, the familiar silhouette of Conford appeared. The bodies of the fallen strapped to their horses silently testified to the brutality of their recent skirmish. To avoid panic, Charlotte ordered the weary, blood-stained force to halt outside the outer fortifications. She told her officers, "Wait here and maintain order. I'll go ahead to report and prepare the Lord." Roland and the others nodded, understanding her caution. A battle-hardened, blood-drenched force appearing suddenly would surely alarm the subjects. Charlotte rode through the trenches and past the watchtowers with a few followers. The sentries recognized the knight, and, despite her gore-streaked armor, allowed her entry. Afternoon sun warmed the Lord's Hall. I was reviewing maps with Edgar, discussing the resettlement of refugees. The heavy oak doors burst open with a crash, startling us. We looked up to see Charlotte standing in the light, her armor dusty, golden hair matted with sweat and blood, reeking of smoke and carnage. It was Charlotte. A breathless messenger followed, stammering, "My lord, Mr. Edgar, Knight Charlotte, she has returned." I scanned her, my eyes lingering on the dark bloodstains and damaged armor. I dismissed the messenger with a wave. I stepped forward, my voice steady. "Charlotte, it seems you've been through a hellish battle." Edgar silently handed her a cup of water. Charlotte drained it, the water washing away a streak of blood on her jaw. She wiped her mouth and reported, "We encountered a Solonian elite vanguard battalion in the Black Forest Valley." She omitted Leyon's incompetence, stating, "Commander Leyon was severely wounded but is stable. We paid a heavy price, but we crushed the enemy." She smirked. "That Solonian officer you failed to kill at Icewater Creek? I finished him for you." I looked at her with deep suspicion. I asked, "You were a scout unit tasked with reconnaissance, not combat. Why did you engage the Solonian vanguard so violently?" Charlotte offered a bitter, mocking smile. "Why? Because our temporary commander, Leyon, found hundreds of Solonian cattle and insisted on dragging the spoils with us." Her eyes sharpened. "I warned him we were slow, obvious targets, but he was blinded by greed. As expected, we were hunted down and nearly wiped out." She sighed, her tone softening. "At least he came to his senses at the end, fighting to the death to save what remained. He redeemed himself, though the cost was terrifying." I nodded, choosing not to press for details. "And the others?" "I didn't want to frighten your subjects," Charlotte said, gesturing to her bloodied state. "They are waiting outside, and they are in dire need of rest." "Understood." I ordered Edgar, "Go welcome them. Prepare hot food, water, medicine, and quarters immediately." "At once, my lord." Edgar bowed and hurried out, closing the doors. The hall fell silent. Charlotte immediately dropped her commanding facade. She sighed in relief and threw herself into my chair. She kicked off her mud-caked boots, letting them fall onto the stone floor. She propped her long legs onto the table, her calves aching from days in the saddle. "Finally, I'm alive," she groaned, eyes closed, savoring the safety. "My bones feel like they're falling apart." She rubbed her legs, whining, "I'm starving. Carl, get me some food. I want meat." I paused, feeling a strange sense of irony. This was my castle, yet I felt like her servant. Seeing her exhaustion, however, I couldn't refuse and found myself amused. "Very well," I smiled, turning to find food. Outside, the cavalry force began moving toward the gates under Edgar's guidance. The sight of the soldiers, clad in a mix of Plantagenet armor and Solonian loot, carrying their fallen comrades, shocked the subjects of Conford. People stopped their work, staring in stunned silence at the army that seemed to have returned from the fires of hell. Edgar arranged for the soldiers to be housed in the semi-subterranean houses of the outer city. Months ago, these dwellings housed Conford's first slaves. Now, I have freed them all. These former homes now temporarily house wounded and exhausted soldiers, while the freedmen have moved into new stone houses. I stood on high ground, observing the orderly yet crowded camp below. Edgar, Old Moore, and Brendan were busy directing the distribution of beds. Village medics and army physicians were tasked with cleaning wounds and changing bandages. Amidst the scent of herbs and stew, I reflected on Conford's transformation from ruins to a budding fortress with promising harvests. The settlement had grown, and the fields of rye and peas were nearing their first harvest. The subjects now possessed surplus grain and looked toward the future with hope rather than hunger. If we survive the Solonian siege, I thought, I can finally implement taxation after the harvest. I knew the territory could not rely indefinitely on family funds or war spoils. A stable tax system was the foundation for Conford's self-reliance and prosperity. This required strength and timing, and the ultimate test was approaching. Edgar approached, reporting that all returning cavalry had been settled. They had been provided with semi-subterranean emergency shelters within the fortress. The kitchen had prepared hot broth and bread for every soldier to combat the cold and fatigue. Pleased with the efficiency, I commended Edgar. Edgar bowed, asking for further instructions. I requested a hearty meal and hot water for Charlotte to bathe. Edgar complied, and I summoned the veteran knight, Brendan. I spoke gravely. Charlotte's group decimated a Solonian elite cavalry unit. The survivors will report back, and the Solonians will surely seek revenge with a large army. I noted that Charlotte's large force could not have hidden their tracks. Solonian scouts will soon realize they didn't return to France City, but came here. We are their primary target. I issued my command. Conford is at maximum alert. All militia are to report for duty immediately. Double the sentries, reinforce defenses, and prepare all ammunition and siege weapons. We must be ready for a siege. Brendan saluted firmly, vowing that the barbarians would not easily breach Conford. A thunderous, urgent horn blast echoed across the fortress, signaling the emergency. The piercing, rhythmic sound carried an unmistakable aura of war. In the new residential district, Otto's home. Otto was enjoying a rare moment of rest with his wife, Marissa. The horn blast jolted Otto to his feet. Marissa grabbed his arm in terror. Otto donned his militia uniform, explaining, "Highest alert. Everyone must report to the castle immediately." Marissa trembled, asking if war had arrived. "I don't know. Lock the door and stay inside." Otto kissed her forehead and rushed out. The streets were chaotic as men scrambled to organize their gear. Men working in the fields abandoned their tools and sprinted toward the castle. Otto joined the flow of people, feeling a mix of tension and primal combat instinct as they reached the castle square. Combat soldiers stood in formation, fully armed and ready for battle. Brendan and Richter were inspecting the ranks. Auxiliaries distributed extra quivers and supplies. The arriving militia were quickly directed to their designated areas. Otto was called up for roll call. He received his flintlock musket and ammunition pouches. Feeling the cold, heavy weight of the weapon, he realized this was no drill, it was real war. All available militia and soldiers were now assembled. Despite their exhaustion, they stood solemn, gripping their weapons as they looked toward me and Brendan. I deferred to Brendan, who stepped forward, standing tall in his armor. Brendan scanned the crowd, taking a deep breath. His voice boomed across the square. "Soldiers, warriors of Conford. Days ago, Knight Charlotte led our Plantagenet cavalry to a brilliant victory against 300 elite Solonian raiders." He paused, letting the shock ripple through the crowd. They didn't retreat. They used their lances and sabers to slaughter over 100 of those arrogant bastards. The crowd erupted in cheers and pride. Brendan raised a hand, silencing the crowd as his expression turned grim. "But this victory brings danger. The survivors will lead the Solonian army to our doorstep like wolves smelling blood." He laid out the situation bluntly. "We have two choices. First, hand over the wounded France City cavalry who trusted us, hoping their blood will appease the Solonians." The crowd murmured in anger at the suggestion. Brendan continued, his voice like a hammer. "The second choice, lock our gates, take up our weapons, and stand with our brothers who bled for the northern frontier. Tell those barbarians that if they want to touch our people, they must step over our corpses. We fight to the last man." Brendan drew his sword, roaring, Tell me your choice. Will you be cowards begging for mercy, or true northern men who show the Solonians that Conford never falls? A brief silence was shattered by a volcanic roar. Fight to the death. We won't surrender our brothers. Fight the savages. Defend Conford. The air filled with shouts and the clatter of weapons against shields. I watched as every soldier's eyes burned with resolve. Though afraid, none chose the path of humiliation. The northern spirit and camaraderie were ignited. I watched Brendan look at his impassioned troops with a mix of relief and grim determination. I watched him slam his sword down. Good. You've done the North proud. Now, take your posts. Reinforce the works, sharpen your blades, and keep your eyes peeled. Let's prepare a hell those Solon bastards will never forget. Roar. The soldiers dispersed in orderly fashion. I saw that fear remained, but it was now eclipsed by iron-willed resolve. Frostguard, Governor's Mansion. Once the seat of the Plantagenet Northern Province, it was now the power base of the Solon chieftain, Harold. Rough animal-hide banners replaced fine tapestries, and the air reeked of leather, smoke, and blood. On the cold stone floor, I watched several surviving Solon cavalrymen kneel, trembling, their armor shattered and bodies caked in filth. At the head of the hall sat the great chieftain on a throne of white bear fur. Harold. He was mountain-like and rugged, his sharp, hawk-like eyes eerily calm. He had already received news of Thorstein's vanguard battalion's crushing defeat in the Black Forest Valley. While not his elite legion, the vanguard was composed of ambitious second sons and mercenaries. Yet, to be routed by Plantagenet scouts on open plains, losing over 100 men with their commander missing, was an unprecedented disgrace for the Solon cavalry. Flanking him were Isgir, commander of the Tiger Legion, and Sven, commander of the Bear Legion. Both were Harold's half-brothers and loyal lieutenants, commanding his most elite forces. Their faces were dark with fury and bloodlust. The defeat stained the honor of all Solon warriors. The hall was deathly silent, save for the crackling hearth and the soldiers' ragged breathing. I watched Harold tap his stone armrest rhythmically. Asterisk tap, tap asterisk, each sound striking the kneeling men like a hammer. Finally, he spoke, his voice cold and chilling. Where is Thorstein? Don't tell me he died heroically. The lead scout trembled violently. Great chieftain, the commander. He didn't return. He fled southwest with a few dozen men. He dared not face your wrath. Harold chuckled, a cold, cruel sound that made everyone shudder. Fled? Good for him. Perhaps you should have done the same to live a few days longer. The kneeling soldiers begged for mercy, claiming they had fought to the death to escape. Harold's smile vanished. He signaled his stone-faced captain of the guard. The guards dragged the sobbing survivors away. Execute them, Harold commanded, his voice flat, along with all the other cowards who returned. Hang their heads at the gate for 3 days. Let the army know. Any who flee from the Plantagenets and shame Solon honor will meet the same end. No mercy. The screams of the condemned faded into the distance. Soon, the sickening sound of blades meeting bone echoed, followed by silence. The scent of blood drifted into the hall. Harold turned to his brothers, who stood ready for orders. Isgir, Sven, Harold said, this shame must be washed in blood. Those Plantagenet rats won't make it home. Select 400 of your finest, swiftest light cavalry from the Tiger and Bear legions. Appoint a ruthless officer to lead them. My order is simple. Harold leaned forward, eyes blazing. Catch them. Bind them. Kill them all before they reach the shell of France City. I want their heads and guts to decorate the gates of my future empire. Yes, brother. The two commanders roared, their voices shaking the hall. They strode out immediately to assemble their vengeful spearhead. They would bring death to those who dared provoke Solon. Harold sat alone, tapping his armrest, gazing south, already envisioning the slaughter of the fleeing Plantagenets. Inside and outside Conford, the atmosphere was tense. Everyone knew the Solon retaliation was imminent. I knew that retreating into the castle was safest, but it couldn't house all my subjects and livestock. More importantly, the new settlement outside the walls was the foundation of Conford's future. I would not abandon it. I chose a defensive position outside the settlement, scouting the terrain myself. The line was backed by 2 newly built arrow towers providing crossfire. The west was anchored by a reinforced stone fort. The east was protected by rugged hills, limiting large-scale cavalry maneuvers. This forced the Solonians into a frontal assault, neutralizing their flanking and horse archery tactics. I designed a defense centered on infantry and ranged firepower. I laid out a rectangular camp, deploying my troops from left to right. The militia held the flanks, relying on fortifications for defense. The core was held by well-trained combat soldiers, the backbone of the line. Conford mobilized instantly. Everyone capable, men, women, and children, joined the construction. They worked feverishly, felling trees and digging earth. The soft summer soil made excavation easier than expected. They dug a deep trench, using the earth to build a solid breastwork. The breastwork was not continuous. I ordered gaps every 5 meters. These gaps were designated firing positions for the musketeer squads. I predicted that undisciplined Solon infantry would instinctively rush these gaps, bunching up and becoming easy targets for my muskets. In front of the trench, they planted rows of sharpened stakes and check hedgehogs to break any charge. By noon, a rudimentary but well-structured defensive line was taking shape under my supervision. A deep trench, a layer of dense obstacles, and a notched breastwork formed 3 lines of defense before the living quarters. I kept the soldiers working through the scorching afternoon, prioritizing coordinated drills over rest. I gathered officers Brendan, Richter, and Roland behind the fortifications for a tactical rehearsal. These obstacles will force the Solon cavalry to dismount, I explained, pointing to the trench and caltrops. Their charge is useless here. They must attack on foot. When they reach 150 paces, the arrow towers and archers will fire to disrupt their formation, I instructed Richter, whom I had placed in command of all ranged units. When they reach the breastwork, the musketeer squad will fire in volleys at the bottleneck, then retreat to reload. I turned to Brendan and Roland. Pikemen and sword and shield infantry stand behind the musketeers. Once they retreat, you fill the gaps immediately to hold the line. Militia, guard the other sections of the breastwork and support the center. I drilled them repeatedly. I had the musketeers practice the reloaded advance-fire retreat cycle, while I watched the pikemen practice rapidly plugging gaps to form a wall of spears. Despite the sweat-soaked clothes, no one complained to me. Everyone focused, knowing that every drop of sweat now increased their chances of survival and victory. As the sun set, I watched the defensive position glow gold. Exhausted but resolute, the soldiers performed one final full-scale rehearsal for me. The fortifications were ready, and the tactics were set. Now, we could only wait for the inevitable, bloody battle. A heavy, ominous tension hung in the air around me. On the plains east of Frostgard, 400 Solon cavalry rode south at high speed. Unlike Thorstein's wild vanguard, this unit was disciplined, well-armored, and lethal. Selected by Legion Commander Isgir, they were led by the veteran battle commander Unag. Unag was a legend within the Solon army. Rising from a lowly infantryman through sheer ferocity and wit, he had earned his position as a commander of 300. A veteran of Harold's major campaigns, his body was covered in scars. In a meritocratic hostile Solon military, his status proved his exceptional capability. He led this elite force to the Black Forest Valley, the site of the recent skirmish. The scene was harrowing. The valley was a mess of trampled earth and blood, swarming with flies and crows. Dozens of rotting Solon corpses and carcasses littered the ground, emitting a foul stench. Many bodies had been looted, leaving only rags and gnawed bones. Bloated carcasses of scarred livestock remained as well. Halt! Unag raised a gauntlet fist, and the unit stopped instantly, displaying high discipline. He dismounted, his sharp eyes scanning the blood-soaked ground. Ignoring the gore, he focused on the battlefield traces. He crouched to examine the hoofprints and cart tracks. He touched the deep prints and brushed aside trampled grass. Heavy hoofprints, dragging marks, carrying wounded, he muttered, frowning. The main force went south toward France City, but his gaze locked onto a different set of tracks. Numerous hoofprints deviated from the main path, heading southeast. Southeast. Unag stood, eyeing the desolate hills. That's not the way to France City. Why go there? Experience told him that such anomalies were suspicious. The Plantagenets wouldn't abandon a safe retreat to France City for a worthless wasteland. Unless they aren't retreating, but regrouping? He mounted his horse and pointed southeast. Change direction. Follow them. Stay alert, move fast. The 400 cavalry surged forward like a steel torrent. After a day of relentless tracking, the signs grew clearer. Campsites and cooking pits confirmed his suspicions. The following afternoon, scouts signaled they had found the target. Unag rode to a ridge, his eyes widening in disbelief at the sight before him. In the valley stood a fortress built against the mountain, reinforced with stone walls, watchtowers, and new trenches. The Plantagenet flag flew atop the main keep. Conford. Unag whispered the forgotten name. He recalled it as one of the pioneering decree outposts. He had assumed the noble nobodies sent there were long dead. He never imagined they had not only survived, but were bold enough to ambush his troops. So that's it. Unag realized. The Plantagenet cavalry hadn't fled to France City. They had returned to their nest. A cruel smile touched his lips. It seems some Plantagenet rats have forgotten who rules the north. He drew his scimitar. Good. I'll wipe you and this eyesore off the map. Instead of a full charge, Unag sent a 20-man scout team ahead. They were to probe the defenses and test the enemy's reaction. Before they had advanced a mile, a sharp, sudden gunshot rang out from the nearby woods. Bang! Followed by the sounds of skirmishing and angry Solon curses. Unag pulled out his telescope. He saw a shocking sight. His scouts were being intercepted and engaged by an equal number of Plantagenet cavalry. The two sides clashed in the open. The Plantagenets were not defensive. They were aggressive, using their mobility to outmaneuver the scouts and firing their muskets whenever an opening appeared. Despite most shots missing, the Solon cavalry's aggressive, proactive combat stance caught Unag off guard. Is this really the Plantagenet army? Unag frowned. In his experience, northern Plantagenet forces usually hunkered down in cities or fled at the mere mention of Solon iron cavalry. When did they become so bold as to intercept and surround scouts in the open field? Their eyes held a burning desire for battle, not fear. Damn it! Unag cursed as his scouts were nearly cut off by the enemy's suicidal tactics. He couldn't let his precious elite scouts be wasted. Second and third squads, push up. Cover them, he ordered. 2 more Solon squads charged toward the fray. Facing superior numbers, the Plantagenet scouts whistled, broke off, and retreated behind their defensive fortifications. The Solon cavalry halted cautiously before the defenses, unwilling to press further. This pause allowed Unag and his officers to inspect the Plantagenet field defenses. Unag's irritation shifted to gravity. The layout was masterful. Deep trenches, layers of caltrops, and a breastwork with strategic gaps formed a deep, integrated defense. The terrain choice was equally clever. Flanked by natural obstacles or rugged hills, the position forced any attacker into a frontal assault against a death trap. High arrow towers loomed behind, covering the entire front. Through gaps in the breastwork, Unag spotted soldiers in iron armor standing ready. The position was silent, disciplined, and devoid of panic. These were well-trained, resolute soldiers. Nothing like the cowardly garrison he had expected. His initial confidence vanished, replaced by heavy pressure. His 400 elite cavalry could not break this defense. A successful assault would come at a catastrophic cost. These were veterans from the Tiger and Bear legions, far too valuable to lose in a siege. Retreat to a safe distance and camp. Unag ordered, his voice heavy. Deploy scouts to blockade all roads to Conford. No one attacks without my command. Send the fastest messengers back to Frostguard, he added. Report the situation to Legion commanders Asgir and Sven and Chieftain Harold. Tell them Conford is heavily fortified and the garrison is fierce. We lack siege equipment. Request infantry and siege engines immediately. Unag stared at the bristling fortress, his expression grave. He could only wait. He waited for the reinforcements from Frostguard to crush this stubborn thorn. On a tower behind the Conford lines, I watched the Solon movements alongside Charlotte. The cold wind whipped our hair. Charlotte looked at the Solon cavalry, her face weary. I thought we'd have time to rest. Why are they here so soon? Carl, are you sure this makeshift line will hold? She asked, masking her worry. I didn't answer, continuing to scan the Solon camp with my monocular. My brow furrowed. I don't know, I said, my voice heavy. It depends on how many troops they commit. I pointed to the camp. Look at their deployment, the patrols, the sentries, the layout. It's orderly. Unlike the wild vanguard we faced before, their commander is a cautious, experienced veteran. He won't waste elite cavalry in a frontal charge against our defenses. He's holding back and blockading us, I analyzed. He's waiting for infantry and siege engines. Charlotte turned pale. If the main army surrounds us, how can we hold? She grabbed my arm. Should I try to break out? I can reach France City and beg the Count for reinforcements. I shook my head. Look at their blockade. They've sealed the roads. We'd be hunted down and shot before we got far. These are the main Solon legions, not the rabble from before. Seeing her panic, I softened. Don't worry. If this line falls, we can retreat to the castle core. It's much stronger and can hold for a long time. Besides, I reasoned, the Solon's main goal is raiding the south. They need to pressure Blackstone Pass. Harold may not want to waste precious infantry and siege engines on a single outpost, which would disrupt his entire raiding schedule. More importantly, I said, looking toward France City, Count Rochefort isn't a fool. As governor of the north, he watches the Solons closely. If they move their main force toward Conford, he'll notice. He won't sit idly by. He'll act before we even need to ask. Charlotte relaxed slightly, though her anxiety remained. She knew war was unpredictable. Solon madness and Harold's ambition defied logic. We fell silent, watching the smoke rise from the enemy camp, the air thick with the tension of impending war. Like Unag, we could only wait for the attack. We waited for the decisions from Frostguard and the arrival of the unknown Solon army. In the governor's mansion at France City, Count Rochefort sat in his smoke-filled study, his face a mask of cold anxiety. The spicy tobacco smoke couldn't soothe him. Leyon's scout unit was long overdue. He had sent several parties to search, but none returned with news. A chilling thought gripped him. Were they wiped out? He didn't want to believe it, but the lack of survivors was ominous. Leyon was young and reckless, but he was no fool. Leyon is a veteran officer from a military noble family, one of the few capable of effectively engaging the Solonians. Count Rochefort realized with bitterness that few of his commanders possessed the courage to face the Solonians in open field combat. Leyon's father, Baron Old Hawk, was a renowned northern commander who died in despair after his castle fell to the Solonians. Leyon inherited both his father's title and his deep-seated hatred for the Solonians, alongside his tactical acumen. Most other noble officers, terrified by the Solonians, preferred hiding behind city walls rather than fighting in the field. Losing Leyon would be a devastating blow to the Count. Even more distressing was the presence of his daughter, Charlotte, and the promising Lord of Conford, me, in that same unit. As the Count spiraled into anxiety, the study door was violently kicked open. His scribe rushed in, followed by a dust-covered cavalry officer in mud-stained armor. The officer, breathless and trembling, wore a broken arrow embedded in his helmet. The Count's heart sank. He recognized the commander of his elite scout unit. "What happened?" the Count demanded, slamming his pipe down. "Did you encounter the Solonians? Where's Leyon?" The officer saluted, his voice shaking. "My lord, we encountered a large Solon army 30 miles east of Ashbourne." "A large army?" the Count asked, his pupils constricting. "What is their composition?" "I cannot count them exactly, but it is a main legion, not mere raiders. They have both cavalry and infantry." "We tried to scout, but their outriders were vigilant. We lost 3 men and were forced to retreat. This arrow hit me during the withdrawal." The Count's face darkened. "A main legion? Are they heading for France City?" He immediately dismissed the thought. 300 men? That's too small for a siege. The officer shook his head. "No, my lord. They are heading southeast." He took a breath and delivered the chilling news. "Their route leads directly to Conford." "Conford? Karl's territory." The Count rose, his face turning pale with sudden clarity. He deduced the truth. Either Leyon's scouts were defeated and fled to Conford for protection, or they won a major victory, infuriating the Solonians, and retreated to Conford to regroup. He stared at the officer. "The Solonians are mobilizing a main legion to crush a new outpost. Leyon must have dealt them a heavy blow." They are out for revenge. The Count's heart tightened at the realization. If true, Conford faced far more than just 300 men. The scouts likely only saw the vanguard. With Karl's limited strength and his newly armed militia, the Count calculated, he will suffer heavy casualties, or even total annihilation. He could not abandon his investment, the promising young lord, or his daughter, Charlotte. Send double the scouts, the Count commanded. I need to know their exact numbers, composition, and siege equipment. Report back immediately. Yes, my lord, the officer replied, rushing out. Wait, the Count shouted to his staff. Sound the alarm. The city is under martial law. Assemble 2 full cavalry battalions, a heavy infantry phalanx, and all available archers and crossbowmen. Quartermaster, prepare 10 days of supplies, arrows, and medicine. Recall all officers on leave and check all war horses. Speed is vital. Every moment Conford holds, our chances of victory increase. The governor's mansion erupted into activity as the heavy alarm bells rang out across French City. The northern stronghold braced itself like a lion awakening. The Count stood by the window, gazing southeast toward the beleaguered fortress. Hold on, Karl. Charlotte, he whispered. Reinforcements are coming. 2 days had passed since the Solonians first appeared near Conford. For 5 days, I had kept Conford hunkered down like a hedgehog. All production ceased as my territory entered a state of high-tension siege. Fortunately, previous harvests ensured food supplies remained sufficient. However, the psychological pressure of the constant Solonian blockade grew daily. My subjects hid in their homes, filled with anxiety and fear. My soldiers stood watch day and night, their nerves fraying under the strain. I moved my command post to the front lines, living alongside my men to monitor the enemy. I knew the enemy's silence was the calm before the storm. On the 5th morning, the watchtower bells rang out frantically. A sight that stopped our hearts greeted us. A massive black phalanx of at least 1,000 Solonian infantry, armed with spears, axes, and swords, emerged on the horizon. The true siege army had arrived. They have siege rams. We are finished. Panic rippled through the militia and soldiers alike at the sight of the overwhelming force. Whispers turned into screams of terror as the defensive line wavered. I arrived at the front with Charlotte and Brendan to assess the situation. Everyone's face turned grim as we watched the bloodthirsty army approach. It's finally here, I breathed, forcing myself to remain calm despite the enemy's size. Karl. Charlotte's voice trembled as she gripped her sword hilt. Old Brendan frowned. My lord, Harold is determined to pull out this thorn. This force is enough for a full-scale siege. At the front of the Solonian line, Unag sat on his horse, coldly surveying my fortified defenses of Conford. Even he felt a sense of hesitation. A direct assault on such a defensive system would be costly. He turned to a burly officer beside him. Ingvar, look at their formation. What do you think? I watched as Ingvar, battle commander of the Sparrow Legion, led nearly 1,000 infantry, including auxiliaries, to reinforce Unag under Harold's orders. Though not one of Harold's core elite legions, I observed that the Sparrow Legion has grown rapidly, becoming a formidable second-tier force. I noted that Harold left them behind to monitor France City and prevent a sortie while the main force raided south. I realized this thankless task, which excludes them from looting, is usually avoided by other legions. I saw that Harold kept the increasingly unruly Sparrow Legion here as a form of disciplinary suppression. I knew the promise of looting Conford serves as their only compensation. I watched Ingvar squint at the Plantagenet defensive line. I saw his scarred face twitch as he chewed tobacco. Damn, he spat, his voice raspy. The position is devious. Mountains and stone forts on both sides force us into a narrow front where our cavalry can't charge and our numbers are cramped. I watched him point at the breastwork and trench. That wall and ditch ruin our archers. We can't shoot effectively without getting close, which puts us in range of their arrow towers. I saw him eye the gaps in the breastwork with suspicion. Those gaps aren't random. I bet they're hiding Plantagenet musketeers there to blast us when we try to squeeze through. I observed Unag nod grimly. I recognized that both men, of Solon tribe origin, possessed a beast-like intuition for combat, honed by a lifetime of slaughter. I knew they were masters of killing and survival, even if they lacked the polish of civilized society. Unlike many aristocratic officers distracted by politics and luxury, I saw that these two focused purely on the art of war. True, Unag said. We must smash this first shell before we can even think about the stone castle behind it. I watched Ingvar grin, revealing yellow teeth. Their attachment to these fields and houses is their weakness. If they had retreated into the castle, we'd have no options. But now, they've given us the chance to crush them in the field. I saw them quickly agree. There was no room for hesitation. Only a direct assault would suffice. Do it, Unag commanded. Ingvar, pull 600 elite warriors. No auxiliaries, only the bravest. Understood, Ingvar replied. I'll lead them myself. I heard Unag add. I'll provide 100 elite horse archers to dismount and provide covering fire from the rear to suppress their towers. Focus the main assault on the breastwork, Unag said, pointing at the map. 400 men, wave after wave. Use bodies to build a path if you have to. I watched him point to the western stone fort. 200 men will attack that flank. If we take it, we threaten their entire line. I'll keep the remaining cavalry on the perimeter to prevent reinforcements. I saw Ingvar strike his chest and march off to mobilize his troops. I observed the Solon army begin to churn like a war machine, with axe-wielding warriors gathering as the air grew heavy with bloodlust. I heard a deep horn blast echo through the ranks. I watched the army move methodically into their final battle positions. I felt the air grow thick with the scent of leather, steel, and anticipation. I saw the young Solon soldier Einar stand still as Thomas, a thin auxiliary, helped him into his chainmail. I knew Thomas, a former Plantagenet border farmer, had been captured years ago and enslaved. I observed that through obedience and utility, he had risen to the rank of auxiliary. I noted that though still low status, he enjoyed slightly better food and the hope of future spoils. I realized that auxiliaries like Thomas were often more desperate for victory than the Solonians themselves. I watched Thomas skillfully adjust the chainmail to ensure Einar's mobility. I saw Einar pat Thomas's shoulder condescendingly. Work hard, Thomas. Once we break their shell, follow us in and loot everything you can. I heard him grin. If you find a pretty woman, I'll let you have her as a wife. I watched Thomas bow obsequiously. Thank you, Master Einar. I will fight with my life. I imagined him envisioning a home and a woman of his own. I saw a dismounted cavalryman hand Einar a composite horse bow and a quiver. I knew Einar, a light infantryman, specialized in archery harassment. I watched Thomas help him secure the gear. I saw Einar strap on his arming sword, feeling relaxed and expectant. I knew that having participated in many raids, he had never seen the Solonians lose. I recalled he had witnessed many Plantagenet soldiers flee and villages burn. To him, I realized, Solon warriors were invincible, and the Plantagenets were merely sheep. I saw that this battle was just another opportunity for wealth and glory to him. I knew he had already used previous spoils to buy goods and a wife back home. Nearby, I watched Torkel, a burly veteran, being armored by 2 auxiliaries. I knew Torkel was a renowned heavy infantryman. I saw he wore heavy, silver-glowing plate armor. I understood these berserkers, clad in heavy armor and wielding giant axes, were the Solon army's primary shock force. I watched Einar look on with envy and helped Torkel tighten his straps. I heard Torkel smile, his voice like thunder. Little Einar, eyeing my iron skin. I heard Einar scratch his head. It's magnificent, Uncle Torkel. I wish I had one. I watched Torkel laugh and pat Einar's chainmail. Work hard, kid. Kill enough Plantagenets and grab enough gold, and maybe the commander will gift you a set. I saw him turn serious. We were left behind to guard the home front, so our winter comfort depends on this single battle. Don't be a coward. Follow me, and everything inside, grain, silk, gold, women, is ours. I heard Einar nod fervently. I'll follow you, Uncle Torkel. I heard officers' roars fill the air. Form up. Advance. Check weapons. Archers forward. Berserkers, shields up. Then, I watched the noise fade into a suffocating silence. I saw every soldier take their place in the attack formation. I noted that at the front were the assault infantry with crude wooden shields and heavy axes. I saw that behind them were archers like Einar for ranged suppression. I observed that further back were the berserkers, the iron hammers meant to shatter the defensive line. Further away, 100 elite mounted archers dismounted and aimed their bows at the Plantagenet positions. Unag's main cavalry force circled the perimeter, sealing the battlefield. Battle commander Ingvar surveyed his ready troops from horseback. Ingvar drew his scimitar, pointed at the Conford line, and roared, "For Chief Herald, for the glory of Solon, for wealth and women. Kill them all. Advance. Woo!" A deafening war cry erupted. The massive Solon army marched forward with crushing momentum toward Conford's seemingly thin defense. A forest of steel moved, casting a shadow of death over the land. The atmosphere atop the Conford defense was iron-heavy. As the Solonians' horns sounded and their dark ranks surged forward like a tide, I blew a sharp, piercing whistle, the prearranged signal for battle. The line erupted into action. "Musketeers, forward! Form up!" Otto roared steadily. Clad in worn leather armor and holding a flintlock musket, I stood like a reef behind a gap in the breastwork. 40 musketeers rushed to their positions behind and beside me. They formed two ranks, front kneeling and back standing. Though slightly green, their eyes were resolute. They were equipped with a mix of matchlock and flintlock muskets. They checked their flints, cocked their hammers, and leveled their muskets through the gaps at the approaching Solon army. A chilling, subtle sound filled the air. "Pikemen, fill the gaps. Raise spears," commanded the veteran knight Brendan. Brendan stood at a higher command post behind the musketeers, overseeing the entire field. His pikemen roared and stepped forward. Their weapons were mostly reinforced militia spears or sharpened hardwood poles. Yet, they formed a formidable forest of steel behind the breastwork and fences. They were ready to plug the gaps and bear the brunt of the enemy charge once the musketeers retreated to reload. "Archers, to the breastwork. Fire at will," Richter shouted from the flank. 20 archers climbed onto the breastwork. They fired high-arcing shots to harass the charging enemy and create psychological pressure. "Swordsmen, guard the flanks. Prepare for combat," Roland yelled. Roland led soldiers with swords and wooden shields to defend the weak flanks and the connection to the small stone fort. The line was a cacophony of orders, footsteps, and clashing steel, yet it remained orderly and powerful. Soldiers gripped their weapons, sweating but unyielding. They stared at the approaching Solon army, their fingers trembling. I watched everything from behind the breastwork. Seeing their lord nearby comforted the musketeers. The defense was pulled taut like a bowstring, aimed at the incoming wave of death. I held my whistle, coldly calculating the moment the Solon vanguard would enter optimal range. My whistle would signal the first baptism of fire. The battlefield froze, save for the sound of Solon's heavy footsteps and the Plantagenet soldiers' ragged breathing. Unag did not commit his main infantry yet. He sent light cavalry to harass the flanks. They fired random, high-arcing shots toward the breastwork. Most arrows struck the wooden fences or were blocked by shields. This was a classic Solonian tactic. They hoped to bait the undisciplined Plantagenet musketeers into firing prematurely. Once the musketeers were empty, the Solon infantry would charge during the long reload. Unag's heart sank. The expected panic-stricken volley never came. The musketeers remained as steady as stone statues, silent and disciplined. Only the officers' low commands could be heard. Instead, the Plantagenet archers seized the opportunity. Using superior bows from their elevated position, they rained arrows down on the light cavalry like venomous bees. Thwack! Arg! Cries of pain echoed. Several Solon cavalrymen fell, their panicked horses disrupting the formation. The remaining riders retreated in fear. I watched coldly. I knew these old tricks. They might work on kingdom troops, but not on my Conford soldiers. Discipline was the core of their training. They had been conditioned to obey orders above all else. I had strictly forbidden firing before my command to avoid wasting ammunition. Unag, watching from afar, grew grim. The enemy's discipline far exceeded his expectations. He knew the lethality of those lead bullets, which could pierce even the plate armor of his elite berserkers at close range. His plan to bait our fire had failed. I had cleared the surrounding trees, leaving Unag with no materials to build makeshift shield carts. Tom was not on his side. Suddenly, fierce fighting erupted at the western stone fort, as Ingvar's 200 infantry launched an assault. The fort was small but sturdy and well-positioned. Archers and musketeers atop the fort picked off the approaching Solon infantry. The Solonians, under shield cover, raised ladders and began to climb. Many were struck by rocks and arrows, falling to their deaths. Yet, more followed like ants. Some brave soldiers reached the top, engaging in brutal hand-to-hand combat. As the sounds of slaughter filled the air, Unag and Ingvar exchanged a look of grim determination. Ingvar roared, "The flank attack has pinned them. We must press the main assault now with a barrage followed by a charge." Unag nodded grimly. "Advance the phalanx. Volley at 100 paces to suppress the ramparts, then again at 50. Send the heavy infantry to smash through." The horns blared, and I watched the massive Solon infantry phalanx accelerate. With wooden shields forward and blades like a forest, their heavy footsteps shook the earth. I saw the Plantagenet soldiers grip their weapons, staring at the approaching wave of death. At 100 paces, the Solon army halted. "Draw bows." Einar, hearing his captain, stepped back and drew his composite bow to its limit. "Loose." 100 arrows hissed through the air like a black cloud toward the Plantagenet line. Most arrows clattered against breastworks and shields or embedded in the mud. Some cleared the defenses. "Shields up," officers shouted as soldiers scrambled to cover. Arrows thudded into shields, accompanied by muffled groans. A few unlucky soldiers were struck in the limbs. The Solon phalanx resumed its advance, a moving mountain of death. At 50 paces, I could see the Plantagenet soldiers clearly observing the grimacing faces of the Solonians. The Solon phalanx halted. My command rang out. "Aim. Ready." The musketeers responded in unison. They pressed the heavy musket stocks into their shoulders, steadying their racing hearts. Eyes locked onto the enemy through the sights. Sweat stung their eyes, but no one dared move. Arms trembled from the strain, but they fought their fear to keep the barrels steady. A suffocating silence hung over the line, broken only by the crackle of burning fuses. Solon archers drew their bows again, preparing a second, deadlier volley. Just as the arrows were about to fly, a whistle blew, and the Plantagenet line erupted in thunder. Bang! Bang, bang, bang. The deafening reports drowned out the battlefield. Thick white smoke billowed from the gaps, obscuring the front line. Lead balls tore through the 50-pace gap and slammed into the Solon phalanx. Thud, splat, crack. Einar heard a roar, then saw Ulf, an old veteran beside him, jerk backward. A bowl-sized hole appeared in Ulf's leather armor, spraying blood and gore onto Einar. Ulf collapsed like a felled tree, his bow dropping to the ground. "My leg. I can't see. Mother." Screams replaced war cries as bullets shattered shields, leather, and chainmail. Soldiers fell, writhing in agony with horrific wounds. A dozen Solonians fell in one volley. Einar was stunned. Warm blood coated his face, smelling of iron. He watched his comrade turn into a mangled corpse, witnessing a level of slaughter he had never imagined. The power of the muskets was terrifying. He trembled, his instinct screaming at him to flee. "Hold. Draw." The officer's roar reminded him of the brutal Solon military law. Fearing the execution of his family more than the enemy, Einar raised his bow by muscle memory. Before the archers could loose their second volley, my voice cut through the smoke. "Rear rank. Aim. Fire." A second wave of fire and smoke unleashed another storm of lead into the Solon ranks. More soldiers fell, and the formation wavered in chaos. The Solonians paid a heavy price, finally loosing their second, ragged volley. The arrows caused minimal casualties behind the breastworks. I watched through the clearing smoke. Seeing the carnage among the Solonians, I finally exhaled. I had feared the Solonians' legendary horse archery. But today, fortifications and disciplined musketeers had neutralized their advantage. The Plantagenets suffered few losses while the Solonians were decimated. The Solon army, with its smaller population, could not sustain such an exchange ratio. A low, urgent horn sounded from the rear of the Solon line. The archers retreated in panic. The air remained thick with gunpowder and blood. The second Solon volley had caused little disruption to the Plantagenet line. Musketeers, reload and fall back. Pikemen, plug the gaps. Brendan's voice boomed. The pikemen moved into position. Young Roderick gripped his pike, taller than himself. He watched Otto and the musketeers retreat, knowing it was now the pikemen's turn to face the charge. Move! Plug the gap, the sergeant roared. Roderick and his comrades surged forward, thrusting their pikes through the breastwork gaps. The firing lanes transformed into a forest of steel. Archers on the ramparts continued to pick off the advancing light infantry. Wounded soldiers collapsed one after another. Yet, the remaining Solon infantry stepped over their fallen comrades, pushing ever closer to the breastworks. Following orders, the Solonians retreated, leaving the front to the pikemen. For Solon, smash them, the officer roared. Solon light infantry charged the breastwork and trench, ignoring the corpses and wails of the wounded, driven by bloodlust. The battle descended into brutal hand-to-hand combat. Kill! Battle axes splintered the breastwork's wooden stakes, while heavy flails shattered spear shafts with sickening cracks. Solonians tried to deflect spears or push through gaps with shields. Hold! Thrust! The Plantagenet officer screamed. I watched as Roderick's heart hammered, his body flooded with adrenaline. Gripping his spear, Roderick stared through the gaps at the twisted, blood-crazed faces of the Solonians, smelling their sweat and gore. A comrade nearby shrieked as a Solon spear pierced his leather armor from below, pinning him to the ground. Terrified but trapped by the press of men, Roderick roared and thrust his spear at a Solonian hacking at their formation. The tip met resistance, then sank into flesh. The Solonian looked down at the spearhead protruding from his chest, blood soaking his armor, before collapsing. Roderick yanked his spear back, spraying warm blood. His first kill left his mind blank. He moved mechanically. Thrust, retract, thrust. The slaughter continued at every gap. Despite Solon's numerical advantage, the Plantagenet pikemen held the local edge through defensive works and dense formation. Spears darted from the gaps, felling the approaching Solonians. Solon's numbers meant little in the narrow gaps, where they faced a constant barrage of lethal spear points. Screams, clashing steel, and dying groans merged into a hellish symphony. I observed Roderick, eyes bloodshot, fighting through the numbness in his arms. He mindlessly stabbed any Solonian figure nearing the gap. Blood coated his armor. The ground beneath turned into a muddy, gore-soaked mire. I noticed a young Solonian light infantryman's madness turn to terror as he watched his comrades fall. The soldier dropped his weapon and fled, only to be cut down by a Solon execution squad officer. The sight stirred a flicker of hope in Roderick. Even these barbarians could fear. But the thought was quickly eclipsed by a greater dread. Heavy infantry. Their heavy infantry is here, came the panicked cry. Behind the depleted light infantry, Solon berserkers, steel fortresses, stepped over the trenches toward the breastwork. They were hulking figures encased in heavy plate armor, their eyes cold and predatory. They wielded massive two-handed battle axes, spiked maces, and armor-piercing hammers. Standard spears merely sparked against their thick plating. Their presence brought a suffocating pressure. Like mythical war beasts, they were determined to crush all resistance with raw, violent force. The tide shifted as they smashed shields into the spear formation and swung their heavy weapons. Plantagenet spears snapped, soldiers' hands were shattered, and some were crushed through their armor by the sheer force of the blows. The line faltered. I watched Roderick witness a berserker's double-edged axe cleave two spears in half, the warrior surging forward. Chilled to the bone, Roderick gritted his teeth and joined his comrades in thrusting at the behemoth. The arrival of the Solon heavy infantry changed the battlefield's temperature, like ice in boiling oil. These armored machines were the backbone of the Solon army. Veterans of countless slaughters, they were elite warriors capable of turning the tide of any battle. Their goal was not merely to stabilize the line. They intended to crush the Plantagenet resistance and destroy their will to fight. Einar, exhausted and bloodied, dropped his useless bow and gripped his arming sword, barely parrying a spear. His physical and mental limits were reached. Watching his comrades fall to the meat grinder of spears, he lost the courage to continue. Driven by survival, he and other terrified light infantry turned to flee toward the rear. A wet thud sounded near his ear. A comrade ahead was skewered through the leg by a Plantagenet pikeman and finished off by a volley of spears. Einar scrambled away, desperate to escape the hellscape. He slammed into a cold, hard wall. It was a Solon berserker, who swung his blood-slicked battle axe without a glance. Crack! Another fleeing soldier's head was split open, spraying Einar with gore. Retreaters die! The berserker roared from behind his visor, his gaze locking onto Einar. Paralyzed by the threat, Einar's survival instinct twisted again. With a desperate scream, he gripped his sword and turned back to charge into the slaughter alongside the berserkers. The battle at the gap reached its peak of cruelty. The retreating light infantry were driven back into the spear wall by their own berserkers and execution squads. They were trapped. Ahead lay the lethal spears, behind, the merciless blades of their own side. Many broke down, sobbing, yet were pushed by the tide of men into the steel forest. Spears tore through their bodies, spilling blood and viscera. Some were shoved by their own comrades directly onto the spear points. Einar stumbled through the carnage, his feet slipping on gore and entrails. He swung his sword blindly, unable to reach an enemy, nearly trampled by the press. Finally, he tripped over a corpse and collapsed into the blood-soaked mud. Cowering on the ground, I watched blood-stained feet trample past, consumed by a paralyzing dread that death was imminent. Before I could surrender to despair, the true force of destruction arrived. Solon berserkers, like iron beasts, charged over the corpses of friend and foe to the front line. They slammed their massive iron-clad shields into the Plantagenet spear formation with a deafening crash. The impact was overwhelming. I watched as Plantagenet soldiers felt an irresistible force surge through their spears, splitting their palms and racking their arms with pain. The dense forest of spears buckled and snapped, and the defensive line was forcibly breached. Kill them! Crush them! The berserkers roared, pouring through the gap like a bursting flood. Once in close quarters, I saw the Plantagenet pikemen's disadvantage become fatal. Their long spears were useless in the cramped melee. The berserkers' battle axes, war hammers, and maces became grim reapers. Screams and the sounds of brutal impact erupted behind the line. The berserkers slaughtered the disoriented Plantagenet soldiers with terrifying efficiency. Axes split helmets, hammers crushed ribs, and maces swept through ranks, turning the area into a bloodbath. Relying on discipline and the will to defend their home, the Plantagenet soldiers fought on despite the carnage. Their attempts to counter with short swords and shields were futile against the berserkers' superior strength and equipment. As the line crumbled, I watched the fierce Torkel sweep his massive double-edged battle axe, cleaving a Plantagenet soldier and his weapon in two. Warm blood splattered his armor, adding to his savage appearance. Seeing the gaping hole in the line, Torkel roared in triumph, preparing to lead his men to shatter the entire defense. However, as he looked deeper into the defensive line, his expression shifted from cruelty to utter disbelief. Behind the front, I saw the Plantagenet musketeers silently reform into two disciplined ranks. Kneeling or standing, they leveled their flintlock muskets, the dark barrels staring at the berserkers like the eyes of vipers. The chilling silence was more terrifying than any war cry. Torkel felt his blood run cold. Fire! My roar echoed as 40 musketeers pulled their triggers in unison. Bang! 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 A deafening roar tore through the air as 40 orange tongues of fire erupted, forming a lethal web. Thick smoke obscured the line as a hail of lead balls whistled across the short distance, slamming into the berserkers. A sickening chorus of impacts followed. Lead balls struck heavy plate armor, causing screeching metal to warp and shatter. Even the Solonians' prized plate armor could not withstand the high-velocity lead at such close range. Armor was pierced and torn. Bullets tore into flesh, spraying blood and viscera. Cries of agony and disbelief drowned out the battlefield. The once invincible berserkers were struck down by the dozen, as if hit by an invisible giant. Men fell with blood-gushing chest wounds, shattered skulls, or mangled limbs. Torkel felt a shockwave as his comrade, clad in the heaviest plate, collapsed with a bowl-sized hole in his chest. The warrior gasped, his lifeblood pooling in the mud as he fell. Even the battle-hardened Torkel felt a bone-chilling terror at this efficient, brutal slaughter. Realizing this was not a duel but total destruction, He knew his only hope for survival was to retreat immediately. Retreat. Back away. Shields up, he roared, shielding his vitals and stumbling back toward the gap. Ingvar watched in agony as his elite berserkers were mowed down like wheat. These warriors were the core of his influence and the Legion's most valuable assets. He knew he would have to answer to the Legion commander and herald for this catastrophic loss. Regret flooded him. He had ignored his instincts and allowed greed to drive his men into a death trap. It's over. Everything is over, Ingvar realized, his face deathly pale. He finally understood that this Plantagenet defense was an impenetrable wall his mixed force could not break. He looked at Unag, whose grim expression confirmed they shared the same conclusion. Their eyes met in silent agreement. Sound the horn. Retreat. Full retreat, Ingvar commanded through gritted teeth. Woo, woo, woo. The mournful, urgent horn of retreat replaced the sounds of battle. Retreat. Cover each other. Move. Officers screamed, and the panicked berserkers scrambled to obey. Torkel and the surviving veterans maintained their composure despite the terror. They formed a defensive shield wall and began a disciplined, step-by-step withdrawal. Brendan, knowing better than to pursue such well-equipped veterans, held his position. He ordered his pikemen to secure the gap and reinforce the line, but he would not let them leave unscathed. Musketeers. Front rank, reload. Aim, fire. Rear rank. Aim, fire. Taking advantage of the slow, retreating enemy, I watched the musketeers unleash 2 more lethal volleys. Lead balls struck the retreating Solonians from behind, claiming a dozen more lives before they finally cleared the effective range. Meanwhile, on the west side, I observed the battle for the small stone fort reach a bloody climax. 200 Solon infantry had breached the outer defenses at a heavy cost. The Plantagenet flag had fallen, and soldiers were now locked in a brutal, room-by-room struggle throughout the fort. The narrow space turned the battle into a brutal, primitive melee. I heard the roars, the thud of blades hitting flesh, and the cries of the dying echoing off the stone walls. Every inch of ground was soaked in blood, and I knew lethal ambushes were lurking behind every door. I watched as Solon soldiers charged the stairs frantically while the defenders held their ground at corners and doorways. As the Solonians sensed victory, I heard a shrill retreat horn sound from their main camp, cutting through the air like ice water. Retreat? We're about to take it, a blood-drenched Solon officer roared in frustration within my earshot. Orders were absolute. I saw the Solon infantry, despite their bloodlust, forced to disengage from the meat grinder and retreat under fire. The battered defenders seized the chance. They're retreating. Push them back. For Conford, the commander shouted hoarsely. I watched the surviving Plantagenet troops surge forward like wounded beasts, pouring out of every room and corner to strike the retreating enemy. I saw blades strike necks, spears pin enemies to doorframes, and several Solonians shoved off the ramparts, plummeting onto the rocks below. The retreat devolved into a disastrous rout, and I saw the Solon army leave dozens more corpses behind as they fled the fortress. A bloodied Plantagenet soldier climbed the watchtower, retrieved the stained banner, and hoisted it back onto the battlement. The tattered flag fluttered in the wind, signaling victory. Long live Conford. We held. We held. The survivors erupted into cheers, their voices a mix of exhaustion and ecstatic relief. Their shouts were raspy but filled with unyielding pride. I felt the tension behind the lines vanish, replaced by the lightness of survival. I watched Charlotte lean on her sword, observing the Solon army retreat like a receding tide, a bright smile breaking through her fatigue. Those Solon barbarians aren't so tough. They broke their teeth against Karl's defenses. Edgar's stern expression softened. A hard-won victory. With the Lord's command and the soldier's sacrifice, Conford's name will surely spread across the northern territory. Old Moore was more practical, calculating the costs of arrows, gunpowder, and pensions. We need to get the workshops running at full capacity immediately. While others celebrated, I stood silent, my eyes scanning the battlefield with sharp intensity. My system updated. Task: resist the Solon attack. Completed. Intelligence reward issued. Intelligence: Count Rockefort learned of the Solon movements 2 days ago. Judging this a feint or a strike at his flank, he has dispatched elite reinforcements from France City. The force includes 2 cavalry battalions and a reinforced infantry battalion, 1,200 men total. The vanguard should arrive by noon tomorrow, forcing the Solonians into a pincer if they don't retreat. My eyes flashed, my final worry vanished. As I expected, the Count was no fool. He had clearly anticipated the risk to Conford. Ignoring the chatter, I ordered, clean the battlefield, treat the wounded, reinforce the fortifications, and prepare for night raids. I walked toward the front lines, where the grim reality of the battle replaced the earlier adrenaline. The air was thick with the stench of blood, smoke, and the groans of the wounded. Medics and volunteers scrambled between the front and the makeshift infirmaries. Hold him down. Give him the militia potion. Who has more? The air was filled with desperate cries for supplies and aid. Soldiers lay everywhere, some unconscious, others staring blankly at the sky. Stretcher teams moved the critically wounded as physicians performed emergency surgery and debridement. Precious militia potion was prioritized for the most severe cases, stabilizing them despite the lingering agony. I walked among the wounded, my expression grave. I knelt by a young militiaman whose abdomen was torn open, watching the medic stitch him up. I patted the soldier's cold hand. Hold on, you'll live. The soldier opened his eyes, recognizing me, and nodded weakly. Moving to a soldier with a shattered shoulder, I gave him my own personal dose of militia potion. The pain subsided, and the soldier looked at me with profound gratitude. Recover well. Conford needs warriors like you, I said, my voice steadying the room. The soldiers and medics watched me with newfound respect. My presence and personal sacrifice of medicine deeply moved the men, solidifying their morale. Brendan, the old knight, approached, covered in dust and blood. My lord, Brendan rasped, casualties are heavy. Over 50 dead, 40 severely wounded. The combat soldiers were hit hard. We lost a third of our pikemen. He added with unease, the Solonians are still strong. If they attack like this again tomorrow, we might not hold. I listened, showing no panic. I patted the old knight's shoulder. Rest easy, Brendan. The Solonians won't attack again. Their siege will be broken soon. Brendan looked confused, unsure why I was so certain. I didn't explain, simply watching the Solon army regroup in the distance. With the system's intelligence, I saw the entire board. My eyes landed on a young soldier, Roderick. Roderick was leaning on a spear, helping carry the wounded, his face showing a mix of exhaustion and newfound grit. I remembered him. Roderick. The young man jumped, saluting awkwardly. And my lord, you fought well at the breach today, very bravely, I affirmed. Conford is proud of you. Roderick blushed, stammering, I only did what was necessary, my lord. Your courage won't be forgotten. Get some rest. Seeing the honor in Roderick's eyes and the renewed resolve of the surrounding men, a plan formed in my mind. Money could hire soldiers, but it couldn't forge a soul. Beyond basic survival, public recognition and honor were the most effective ways to build loyalty and combat spirit. I decided to establish a military medal system immediately. I will award medals and honors to heroic soldiers, provide promotions for merit, and record their deeds on monuments within the fortress. I must ensure every soldier who bled for Conford feels their sacrifice is recognized and remembered. This will distinguish the Conford army from mere mercenary bands. Night fell. The Lord's Hall was brightly lit, but heavy with tension. The fireplace crackled, illuminating the weary, stern faces gathered around the long table. I sat at the head, joined by Charlotte, Brendan, Richter, Oldmore, Edgar, and key officers. After a silence, I spoke firmly. We repelled the Solonians, but this is only the start. We must assess our situation and decide our next move. Brendan reported with a hoarse, heavy voice. My lord, the casualty report is grim. 55 dead, including 5 who succumbed to wounds. 43 are severely injured and out of action. Almost everyone else has minor wounds, but can still fight. He paused, his tone dropping. We have fewer than 100 combat-ready soldiers left, all exhausted and wounded. The news caused everyone's hearts to sink. Less than 100 men remained to face over 500 elite Solonians, including terrifying berserkers. Richter offered a glimmer of hope. Enemy casualties are slightly higher, around 70 to 80, mostly elites and berserkers. We captured 4 wounded prisoners during their retreat. Old Moore added. We recovered over 20 sets of Solonian armor and 100 weapons. It helps, but it doesn't fill our manpower gap. Silence returned as all eyes turned to me, waiting for my decision. I looked sharp and calm. I have reliable intelligence that Count Rochefort knows of the siege. Everyone looked up, stunned. I continued. The Count has dispatched reinforcements, 2 cavalry battalions and a reinforced infantry battalion, totaling 1,200 men. Their vanguard could arrive by tomorrow afternoon. Wonderful. The Count hasn't abandoned us. We're safe. The hall erupted in relief and joy, sweeping away the despair. My next words froze their excitement. However, our mission isn't over. My tone turned severe. We cannot wait passively. The Solonians have scouts. If they detect the Count's army, they will retreat immediately. We lack the strength to pursue them. I slammed the table. I don't want to just repel them. I want to annihilate them. We will coordinate with the reinforcements to crush this elite force. The bold, bordering on insane, plan left everyone breathless. Brendan objected immediately. My lord, it's too risky. With fewer than 100 men, how can we pin down 300 elites for an entire day? If the reinforcements are delayed, or the Solonians launch an all-out assault, we will be overrun before help arrives. Richter added, the Solonian scouts aren't blind. Once they see the reinforcements, they'll flee. We can't stop them. The plan relies on us pinning them down, which is exactly what we can't do. Silence returned, heavier than before. I tapped my fingers on the table, my eyes flashing with a gambler's intensity. What if we give them a reason they can't refuse to stay and attack us? A reason to believe victory is within reach, ignoring all risks. The group exchanged confused glances. I looked toward the west. I am going to abandon the stone fortress. What? Abandon the fortress? That's impossible. Brendan stood up. My lord, that fortress is our flank's anchor. Losing it exposes our entire position. The Solonians could easily outflank us or attack the living quarters. Richter shook his head. It will destroy our morale. The men bled to hold it. Edgar added, we'd be handing over our stockpiled arrows and siege equipment to the enemy. I remained calm. You are right, but can we hold both the main line and that isolated fortress with our current numbers? The Solonians will concentrate their force tomorrow. If we split our defense, both positions will fall. Abandoning the fortress looks like a retreat, but it is a trap. We will destroy the supplies before leaving only a shell. When they easily capture it, what will they think? They will think we are exhausted and our defense is crumbling. They will believe victory is right there. That greed will chain them to our main line, making them attack recklessly instead of retreating. We use the empty fortress as bait to fuel their greed, then hold our main line until tomorrow afternoon. I looked at each of them. Victory will be ours. The glory of annihilating this elite force will belong to Conford. The hall was silent as they processed the gamble. Finally, Brendan sighed. It's too risky, but if you are determined, I will follow your orders. The others nodded, still worried but accepting the decision. I stood up. It's settled. Prepare secretly. Evacuate the West Fortress tonight. Take what's important and destroy the rest. Make them think we were forced to abandon it. At dawn, gift them the empty fortress. The strategic deception began under the cover of night. Late that night, the atmosphere in the West Fortress was suffocating. The air reeked of blood and gunpowder from the day's slaughter. The garrison commander, a man with a fresh scar, couldn't believe the order. He glared at the messenger. Retreat? Abandon the fortress? Do you know how many men died to hold this? And now we just hand it to those Solonian bastards. His soldiers gathered around, faces full of shock, humiliation, and rage. Though wounded and bandaged, their eyes burned with defiance. The messenger remained firm. This is the Lord's direct order. Take all weapons and armor. Douse the remaining supplies in oil and prepare to burn them. Burn it. I slammed my fist against the cold stone wall. Why destroy our own fortress? For total victory. To annihilate the Solonians, the messenger shouted, ignoring the soldiers' resentment. The Lord has a plan. We must make them believe we are desperate and unable to hold the flank. It's a lure to pin them down. Execute the order. A lure. My anger shifted into a mix of pain and grim resolve. I looked at my brothers in arms, saw their reluctance, and gritted my teeth. All units. Execute the order. I rasped. Despite their confusion, military discipline and trust in their lord prevailed. I watched the soldiers move in silence, suppressing their emotions to prepare for withdrawal. The process was suffocatingly quiet. Only heavy breathing, clanking armor, and the sound of moving supplies filled the air. I saw them bundle remaining arrows and gather usable swords, shields, and chainmail. Heavy siege equipment like the wolf-tooth slammer and stone reserves were pushed into corners. Finally, soldiers brought out barrels of naphtha. They silently doused the wooden structures, debris, and the bodies of fallen comrades, refusing to let them be desecrated by the Solonians. 30 survivors lined up, taking one last look at the fortress we had sworn to defend. Their expressions were complex: sadness, anger, and resentment, but dominated by obedience and a thirst for victory. Withdraw, I growled, leading the team into the rear corridor. A veteran, bringing up the rear, tossed a torch into the oil-soaked debris. Boom. Flames erupted, consuming the wood and sending thick black smoke into the night sky. The blaze caught the attention of the Solon sentries. I heard the retreating defenders react to distant Solon language shouts and commotion. We didn't look back, our hearts burning with the pain of our sacrifice. We left behind a burning ruin, abandoning our fallen and our supplies. All for a dangerous plan to lure the enemy into a death trap. Inside the Solon army command tent, Unag and Ingvar sat by a fire, sharing a roasted boar leg. They ate in tense silence, cutting meat with sharp daggers. A junior officer knelt, reporting the day's casualties: 73 dead, 16 berserkers, 41 combat soldiers, and 16 light infantry and archers. 11 severely wounded died before nightfall. 20 more are critical. The officer's voice was numb with fatigue. For the Solon army, such losses were heavy but expected in a siege. Unlike the Conford garrison, they lacked proper fortifications and medical support. The expeditionary force carried weapons and rations, but almost no medicine. The severely wounded were often left to die in the wilderness. In Solon's culture, human life was secondary to conquest. Only the loss of elite combat soldiers and berserkers truly pained the commanders. Unag chewed his meat, brow furrowed in silence. Ingvar slammed his dagger into the meat. Damn it. We lost nearly 100 men today. Conford is tougher than expected. Unag tapped the table. The losses are heavy, but I worry about the Count of France City. If he sends reinforcements. Ingvar's face paled. You think he'll attack us from the rear? It's inevitable, Unag replied. The longer we stay, the greater the risk. If his reinforcements arrive while we're bogged down, we won't be able to escape. This fear weighed heavily on them. They had gambled on a quick victory, assuming France City would remain passive. Now, the war was a stalemate, and time was against them. As they debated whether to press the attack or retreat, shouts erupted outside. Look west. The Plantagenet fortress is on fire. Unag and Ingvar rushed out of the tent. To the west, the night sky was stained red by a massive blaze. The stone fortress that had resisted them all day was being consumed by flames. What happened? Ingvar shouted. A scout reported. The Plantagenets set it on fire themselves. We saw them retreat, and then it went up in flames. They burned it. Unag's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. He sensed a trap. Why abandon a key position? Are they so depleted they're consolidating their main line? Ingvar's shock turned to greed. They're finished. They must have suffered even worse than us. They can't even hold their flank. This is our chance. He grabbed Unag's arm. We can't hesitate. We must launch a full-scale assault tomorrow morning. Take the main line, and all the supplies and spoils are ours. Harold will reward us handsomely. Unag remained cautious. Could it be a trap? Are they feigning weakness? A trap. Ingvar roared, eyes bloodshot with excitement. Would they sacrifice a fortress for a trap? Do they even have the manpower? Don't forget our situation. If we retreat now, our fate will be worse than Thorstein's. You know how Harold reacts to failure. Unag trembled at the mention of Harold's punishment. Ingvar's words struck his deepest fear. Returning empty-handed after such heavy losses would surely lead an enraged herald to execute them to intimidate the army. Looking at the fires and Ingvar's manic eyes, Unag's hesitation vanished, replaced by fear of failure and greed for spoils. Fine. We launch the final assault at dawn. We throw everything we have to level Conford. Excellent. Ingvar cheered, already envisioning victory. The two returned to their tent to finalize the suicide mission. The burning fortress acted as bait, leading them to stake everything on this final gamble. At dawn, a tense, lethal atmosphere hung over Conford. In the infirmary, Leyon von Hoek awoke, feeling weak and disoriented. The room smelled of herbs and blood. He was surrounded by bandaged soldiers. "Where am I?" he rasped, his throat parched. His memories were fragmented, chaos, pain, and darkness. "You're awake." A calm voice interrupted him. Leyon turned to see a young man in pristine, cold-shining plate armor. The armor featured precise joints and ancient family crests, clearly a high-value heirloom. The man wore a sharp knightly sword and held an Italian-style helmet. His gear signaled a grim, unwavering resolve. Leyon searched his memory but failed to recognize him. Guarded, Leyon asked, "Who are you?" He stared intently, seeking answers. Questions swirled in his exhausted mind. "This is Conford," I replied calmly. "I am the Lord of Conford, Karl von Schmidt." "You, the Lord Count Rockefort mentioned?" Leyon struggled to sit, but collapsed back in pain. "What is happening?" I summarized the situation. "You've been unconscious for days. We retreated to Conford, and the Solonians besieged us. We held them off yesterday, but suffered heavy losses. They are preparing for a final, decisive assault today. It is kill or be killed." Leyon's heart sank as he realized the gravity of the situation. A final stand. Guilt overwhelmed him as he failed to sit up. "It's my fault. My greed brought the Solon army here and doomed Conford." I shook my head calmly. "Do not blame yourself. The Solonians would have come regardless. I was prepared for this when I chose to develop the northern frontier. You need to rest. Leave the fighting to us." Leyon grabbed my gauntlet. "Let me fight. I can still hold a sword." I firmly pushed his hand away. "Your battlefield is not here." I looked at the other wounded soldiers. "You are the most experienced commander here besides me. I need you to lead the defense of the inner fortress. If the outer line falls, this is the last bastion. Do not let a single Solonian enter." "I am counting on you, Leyon." I nodded and strode out of the infirmary. My plate armor clanked rhythmically, echoing like a death knell. Outside, Charlotte, Brendan, Richter, and Roland were assembled. They were fully armored. Charlotte wore fine plate bearing the Rockefort crest, radiating lethal intent. They looked at me with a mix of resolve, trust, and tragic determination. I stopped before them. I scanned their faces, seeing both their fire and their exhaustion. Without a grand speech, I said simply, "Gentlemen, the time has come. This is the final battle for Conford. Take your positions." I led my officers to the front lines. The scene was transformed from yesterday's wreckage. The defenses were reinforced, breastworks repaired, trenches deepened, and caltrops densely packed. The line was crowded, but the soldiers were a mix of veterans and new faces. Many were terrified, wielding a hodgepodge of standard blades and captured Solonian weapons. These were newly conscripted farmers, lacking training but pressed into service. Remarkably, almost every soldier, veteran, or militia was now armored. Captured chainmail, iron-studded leather, and rare plate had been distributed to the front ranks. The militia, previously in simple leather, now had significantly improved protection. The entire line was fully armored, and the core tactics had shifted. Brendan's musketeer squad remained behind firing gaps, their strength intact. They had suffered minimal losses and were fully resupplied. I had decisively abolished the pikeman formation. I realized that against Solon berserkers, long weapons were a liability once the enemy closed the distance. I ordered all melee troops to switch to short weapons. Axes, maces, swords, and clubs were issued, relying on their new armor for a brutal, close-quarters strategy. They would fire a final volley, then allow the enemy to close in. The armored soldiers would then engage the berserkers in a bloody, hand-to-hand brawl. I also ordered water poured onto the ground, turning the soil into a quagmire to hinder the enemy charge. Once the heavy infantry stalled the berserkers in the mud, the light infantry would strike from the gaps. They wielded daggers and short swords, ruthlessly stabbing into the gaps of the berserkers' heavy armor, necks, armpits, and groins. This brutal, efficient finishing tactic was key to wearing down the elite enemy. It would be a raw, grueling melee of pure attrition. Despite the heavy casualties, it was the only way I could withstand the Solonians' desperate charge while outnumbered. Meanwhile, I had the spears previously used for formations repurposed. At my order, soldiers lashed 3 or 4 spear shafts together, points outward, to create makeshift check hedgehogs. I urgently deployed these on the flanks, especially where the western stone fort no longer provided cover. I knew that once the main line engaged the berserkers, the flanks would be exposed to the watching Solon cavalry. These crude obstacles would delay a cavalry charge, buying me precious time to shift reserves. I pushed the entire defensive line to its absolute limit, utilizing every available resource. I watched as soldiers stood in silence, cleaning weapons and checking armor buckles. New recruits were terrified, but seeing the grim veterans and the homes behind them, I saw their fear harden into resolve. Veterans, knowing the horror of the Solonians from yesterday, gripped their weapons tighter, ready for the coming slaughter. I inspected the line, followed by Charlotte, Brendan, and Richter. I offered no long speeches, only steady, firm eye contact and a nod to each officer and sergeant. All orders were issued, all preparations complete. Now, we only waited. We waited for the Solonians to step into this killing field of steel and flesh. The air hung in suffocating silence, the calm before the storm. From the Solon camp, I heard the muffled sound of war drums and assembly horns echoing. The Solon army reformed before my Conford line, a repeat of yesterday's nightmare. In the morning light, I clearly saw the 3-tiered formation, light infantry in front, archers behind them. At the rear stood the berserkers, like a mobile fortress of steel. Unlike yesterday, the fall and burning of the western fort meant the Solonians' flank threat was reduced. I watched as Unag finally mobilized his cavalry. 300 Solon cavalry gathered on the left, horses pawing the ground, breathing white mist. The riders, in light leather armor, gripped scimitars and bows, watching my Conford line with restless eyes. Yet, this mobile force held back from charging. Between them and my line lay a dense, thorny wall of lashed spears. These check hedgehogs were angled to block any path for a cavalry charge. Furthermore, these were elite light cavalry, masters of mobility and archery, not heavy shot cavalry. Charging a well-prepared, armored infantry line would be suicidal. Their light protection would be shredded by spear forests and musket fire. I knew wasting elite skirmishers against a braced infantry line was a fool's errand. Thus, they waited for a breakthrough in the main battle to exploit. The Solonians had learned from yesterday's bloodbath. Their main infantry halted 70 paces from my Plantagenet line. This distance stayed just outside the musket's lethal range. I watched Einar, standing with the archers, and saw his palms sweat. He stared at my silent Plantagenet line and the dark musket barrels, haunted by yesterday's terror. I watched him glance at the veteran Torkel. The once boastful veteran now looked grim, his lips tight, eyes full of dread for the musket volleys. "Draw bows. Volley fire," the officer roared. I watched Einar reflexively draw his bow, aiming toward the sky. Loose. A rain of arrows arched toward my line 70 paces away. At this distance, the arrows lacked lethal force. Most clattered harmlessly against the breastwork or thudded into the mud. The few that cleared the wall were easily deflected by shields, causing no real casualties. I saw Ingvar watching from the rear, face pale. He understood my intent. We had abandoned our spear formations for a brutal, armored melee. Want to clash steel against steel? Fine, Ingvar decided. He did not pull back his light infantry and archers to let the berserkers through. Instead, the horns sounded for a full-scale advance. Forward. Push them. The Solon infantry moved forward, keeping the light infantry and archers in front. I saw Einar's heart sink. There was no retreat. They were being ordered to march back into the killing zone. I realized the commander's intent. They were to be human shields, absorbing the first volley of musket fire to let the berserkers close the distance. "No, we'll die," a young archer whispered, his legs trembling. But the execution squads behind them forced the formation forward with cold steel. The light infantry marched toward death, terrified and desperate. 70 paces. 65, 60. My Plantagenet line remained deathly silent. I watched Einar, feeling his breath hitch as he smelled the impending smoke and death. The Solonian tide pressed on, each step crushing the nerves of my Conford defenders. The distance shrank, the air thick with impending violence. I stood behind the breastwork, watching the enemy enter the final strike zone. I took a deep breath and gave an unexpected order. "All units, consume the militia potion." The order rippled through the line. Soldiers hesitated for a second, then pulled out the dark, viscous liquid from leather pouches or wooden cups. This was Conford's militia potion, capable of healing wounds and temporarily boosting potential. It enhances reaction speed, strength, and endurance, granting a manic battle will at the cost of severe exhaustion afterward. This was the final trump card, a desperate gamble. As I declared, this was the final battle. Only the victors would survive. The losers would lose everything. The soldiers drank the potion without hesitation. A burning sensation surged from their stomachs. Heart rates spiked, blood felt like it was boiling, and fear was replaced by a fanatical urge to kill. Their muscles trembled with explosive power. Even pain was suppressed. I drank my portion as well. A fiery torrent swept through me. My senses sharpened, time seemed to slow, and my armor felt light and empowering. I donned my Italian-style helmet, the cold metal muffling the world until only my own powerful heartbeat remained. I raised my hand, my voice booming through the visor. "Musketeer squad. Ready." Otto and the musketeers, fueled by the potion, moved with eagle-eyed precision and fluid speed. They leveled their flintlock muskets, locking onto the Solonian soldiers charging through the smoke. "Aim." I stared at the desperate, crazed Solonian light infantry charging ahead. 50 paces. 40. "Fire." I roared, dropping my arm. Bang. Bang, bang, bang. The musketeers unleashed a deafening, dense volley. A storm of leads scythed through the narrow gap. The leading Solonian infantry and archers were mowed down, screaming as they fell in heaps. Blood and gore splattered. The charge faltered amidst the sickening thuds of bullets hitting flesh. Einar dove to the ground by instinct as the lead rain whistled overhead, his comrades falling behind him. He survived, but his face was splattered with warm blood. The Solonian wave continued. Berserkers, protected by heavy armor and fanaticism, roared and launched a final, lethal sprint over their fallen comrades. The ground shook under their heavy boots. Einar scrambled up, knowing he would be trampled if he stayed down. He discarded his bow, grabbed a punctured wooden shield, and rose. Gripping his arming sword, he joined the desperate charge. I realized the Solonians were moving faster than yesterday, leaving no time for a second volley. "Musketeers, retreat." I ordered. Otto led the men back, clearing the gap. I lowered my visor, my vision narrowing to a slit. I drew my knightly sword and shouted, "For Conford, hold the line. Prepare to fight. Roar." The Conford plate armor knights, fueled by the potion, charged forward to plug every gap in the breastwork. Soldiers formed a wall of flesh and steel. The Solonian berserkers slammed into them. Boom! The collision of steel was deafening, a primal clash of raw power and clashing metal. The front line acted as a breakwater against the terrifying impact. Shields and armor groaned and deformed. Battle axes, maces, and swords swung wildly in the cramped space, sparks flying. The berserkers' momentum forced the Plantagenet line to buckle. The breastwork groaned under the pressure, wooden stakes snapping and earth collapsing. Finally, a 10-meter section of the breastwork was pushed over by sheer force. The gap. "Charge!" a Solonian centurion roared. The line was broken, and Solonian soldiers flooded in. The Conford line was torn open at multiple points by the berserkers' suicidal charge. Fierce Solonians poured through, seeking to exploit the breach. However, the Solonian formation fractured as the overeager berserkers surged ahead, allowing Conford soldiers to wedge into their ranks. The battle devolved into a chaotic, brutal melee. Some heavy-armored berserkers slipped in the mud. Their heavy armor became a death trap once they fell. They struggled in the mire, wasting precious energy like beetles caught in a web. The front line became a meat grinder of steel, blood, and mud. Amidst the chaos, Brendan, having just stabbed a berserker, wiped the blood from his face and spotted an opportunity. He roared, "Light infantry, advance!" The light infantry, waiting in reserve, swarmed out like wolves through the gaps in the heavy infantry. They moved nimbly through the mud, targeting the encumbered berserkers. The muddy ground made the heavy-armored foes struggle to keep their balance. Their plate armor became a prison. They slipped and flailed, leaving their defenses wide open. The light infantry seized the moment, closing in on the tin cans. Anyone without the red Conford armbands was targeted. A berserker slipped and fell backward, splashing into the mud. He roared, struggling to rise, but the mud and weight kept him pinned. A light infantryman ghosted toward him and drove a dagger through the visor slit. Ugh! A short, sharp scream echoed from within the helmet. The berserker went limp, blood and mud seeping from his visor. Similar scenes played out across the field. The light infantry worked in teams of 3. One pinned the berserker's weapon, while another sought gaps in the armor, armpits, necks, inner thighs, stabbing and twisting. Daggers were pulled out with sprays of blood and dying groans. The mud turned dark red. This was no longer a knightly duel. It was a brutal slaughter. The once feared Solon berserkers, stripped of mobility and balance in the mud, became helpless prey to me and my men. I watched Roderick, wearing bloodstained plate armor stripped from a Solon corpse, tie a red cloth around his arm. Lacking a proper blade, I saw him wield a heavy, square-headed hammer. Abandoning finesse, he used his drug-enhanced strength to smash any enemy lacking a red armband. Thud! I heard a hammer blow strike a Solon berserker's breastplate. Though the armor held, I saw the shock rupture the soldier's internal organs, sending him coughing blood to the ground. Clang! Another strike shattered a soldier's shoulder, leaving his arm hanging limp. I noted that this brutal blunt force tactic proved devastating in the melee, drawing immediate attention. Torkel, fighting nearby, spotted the Plantagenet soldier causing such chaos. Roaring like a bull, Torkel charged through the fray and slammed into Roderick with overwhelming force. I watched as Roderick's hammer flew away and Torkel pinned him down. Torkel, vastly stronger and more experienced, pressed a knee into Roderick's gut, pinned his helmet with one hand, and drew an armor-piercing dagger with the other. Die, Plantagenet mongrel! Torkel growled, driving the dagger toward the eye slit of Roderick's helmet. I saw Roderick struggle in vain, his strength failing, as he desperately grabbed Torkel's wrist to hold back the blade. The cold tip hovered inches from his eye. Seeing his own terrified reflection in the steel, I could see Roderick felt total despair. Suddenly, a thunderous bang echoed. I watched Torkel stiffen, his movements freezing instantly. A bullet hole appeared near his temple, blood and brain matter leaking out. I saw Torkel's eyes dull, and he collapsed. I watched Roderick push the corpse aside to see Otto, the musketeer squad leader, standing on debris with his smoking flintlock musket. Otto nodded briefly, reloaded, and scanned the field for the next target. The musketeer squad had abandoned formation, moving like ghosts along the chaotic battlefield. They picked off Solon officers and berserkers who were too occupied with melee combat to defend themselves. I realized this tactic proved highly effective, as Solon elites fell one by one to unseen lead bullets. Nearby, I parried a battle axe and swung my sword at a Solon soldier's neck. The blade sparked harmlessly against the heavy gorget. The Solon soldier countered with a sweep. I ducked, realizing armor piercing was futile. I dropped my sword, tackled the soldier, and used my momentum to flip him into the mud. Mounting the soldier, I hammered my iron-gloved fists against the enemy's faceplate. Thud, thud, thud. The soldier struggled, dazed by the impacts, but I kept the pressure on. As the faceplate's hinges gave way with a screech, I punched through the gap, striking the soldier's face directly. The soldier shrieked and went limp as the battlefield descended into total chaos. Everywhere, I saw soldiers fighting in pairs amidst the din of steel, screams, and sporadic gunfire. Blood turned the earth into a dark, muddy swamp littered with ignored corpses and the wounded. Formations were forgotten. Only primal slaughter and survival remained. Flesh met steel, and every second claimed another life. The outskirts of Conford had become a cruel arena consuming all sanity. On a nearby hill, Unag and Ingvar watched the slaughter with grim faces. Ingvar slammed a tree, trembling with rage. Vicious. They flooded the ground to trap our heavy infantry. My elite berserkers are being butchered by peasants with daggers. Unag, if this continues, my elites are finished. Unag was equally pained, as the berserkers were his tribe's wealth. He looked at the starving, trembling auxiliaries behind them and suggested, "Send the slaves. Use them to overwhelm the gap." "No," Ingvar spat. "They're terrified sheep, not wolves. They'll just break and disrupt our own lines. They lack the suicidal ferocity of the Plantagenet light infantry." Ingvar glared at Unag. "Send your cavalry. Now." Their men are exhausted and stuck in the mud. A single charge from a fresh force will shatter their formation and trample them. Unag's knuckles turned white as he stared at the carnage. His cavalry were his final trump card and his foundation for survival. They were light cavalry, built for harassment and archery, not charging heavy infantry. "Ingvar," Unag said hoarsely, "my horses lack armor. In this mud, they'll be dragged down and hammered to death. And the Czech hedgehogs, we'd need to sacrifice a dozen horses just to clear a path, only to be surrounded." Unag stared into Ingvar's eyes. "If we lose them, we lose our only means of retreat. If the line breaks, we all die here." "Retreat," Ingvar shrieked. "Harold will have our heads. We have no choice, win or die." He leaned in, his voice cold. "If we don't take Conford, we lose our power, status, and lives anyway. If we win, the losses are worth it. Glory and spoils will be ours. Cavalry can be replaced, this opportunity cannot." Ingvar pointed at the setting sun. "We have no time. End it now, or wait for Franz City's reinforcements to annihilate us at dawn. Take the gamble, Unag. It's our only chance." Ingvar's words pierced Unag's deepest fears and desires. Looking at the stubborn Plantagenet defense and the looming threat of Franz City, Unag realized he couldn't afford to lose. With a desperate, crazed look, he gritted his teeth and growled. "Fine. We gamble." He turned to his messenger. "Blow the horn. Assemble all cavalry. Scouts, outriders, everyone. Now." "Yes, my lord," the messenger shouted, galloping away. A sharp, urgent horn blast echoed from the rear of the Solon army, contrasting with the battlefield's chaos. Scattered Solon light cavalry, confused by the unprecedented order, quickly converged toward Unag. Hoofbeats thundered, kicking up dust. A force of about 400 riders assembled before the Conford position. This was Unag's final reserve, light cavalry intended to break the stalemate. Unag drew his blade, pointing toward the meat grinder battlefield. "Warriors, follow me. Crush them. For Solon. For victory. Woo!" The cavalry roared, drawing their scimitars. Unag led the charge, a desperate strike against the exhausted Conford line. I, drained, drove my sword into the gap of a Solon berserker's armor. The enemy shuddered and went limp. The stench of blood choked me. I tried to rise but collapsed back into the gore, dizzy and weak. The militia potion's effects were fading, leaving behind agonizing exhaustion. I felt hollow, unable to lift my arms. Suddenly, the rhythmic, heavy thud of a cavalry charge approached. "Cavalry! Solon cavalry!" a soldier screamed. I tried to stand but stumbled. A gauntlet hand gripped my arm, steadying me. I looked through my visor at the armored figure supporting me. I recognized those sky-blue eyes. Charlotte. I removed my heavy helmet. My face was a mask of sweat, blood, and mud. My breathing was ragged. I offered Charlotte a weary, reassuring smile. "Thank you." I leaned heavily on her to remain upright. Charlotte's voice, muffled by her visor, was laced with anxiety. "That's their final reserve. Carl, we've done all we could." Her voice trembled with despair. Roland and his remaining Plantagenet cavalry roared, charging the massive Solon force to buy time. The dozen riders looked tragic against the 400 Solonians. Like moths to a flame, they sacrificed themselves to allow me and my men to retreat. "They're buying us time," Charlotte urged. "Carl, you're the lord. You must retreat to the castle. Go." I watched the Plantagenet cavalry get swallowed by the Solon tide. I shook my head. We can't escape, Charlotte. Exhausted infantry can't outrun light cavalry on a plain. If I must die, I'll face them. I won't be cut down from behind like a coward. I pulled my sword from a corpse, pointing it at the approaching enemy. I misjudged the situation and doomed everyone. I can at least choose how I face the end. My hand trembled as I gripped my blade. I led them here. I will pay the price for those who trusted me. I looked at my soldiers with painful, resolute calm. Charlotte removed her helmet, her eyes filled with tears and fury. Karl von Schmidt. Listen, losing a battle isn't the end. Conford stands. The people are still there. As long as you live, there is hope. She grabbed my armor. No one blames you. A living lord is the heart of the territory. What happens to Conford if you die? Her tone shifted to a plea. I don't want a martyr. I need a living lord. I looked into her eyes, silent. I pulled her into my arms and kissed her deeply. The kiss tasted of blood and fire, desperate and absolute. I pulled back, pressing my forehead against hers. Charlotte, humor me this once. I won't be a deserter, and I won't watch you die with me. Go. Take the survivors and retreat. I'll hold them. I smiled self-deprecatingly. If luck isn't on our side, perhaps none of us will make it. Charlotte stared at me, stunned. My eyes held a strange, calm confidence. Even facing death, I radiated a light that compelled loyalty. I won't go, she sobbed. We die together. I suddenly froze, hearing something. Wait, listen. Hoofbeats. Charlotte choked back a sob. What? We're being charged. Not from the front. I shouted. From the rear. From the castle direction. We turned to see a cloud of dust on the mountain road. A cavalry unit was descending at high speed. About 50 riders, led by a figure Charlotte recognized instantly, Leyon. It's him, she gasped. Leyon's force didn't slow down, ignoring me and Charlotte. They slammed into the flank of the Solon cavalry with thunderous force. The timing was perfect. The Solonians were already disorganized from hitting the caltrops and Roland's charge. Their arrowhead formation was broken. I watched as the Solon cavalry's formation lagged, losing momentum and leaving them vulnerable. Leyon's 50 riders were different. They were true heavy lancers, clad in polished plate armor, wielding heavy lances with icy resolve. 10 days prior, I had seen these knights survive a brutal, life-or-death charge. Their armor bore scars and dried blood. Their eyes held the cold, killing intent of veterans, and their movements were lethal. I watched Unag observe the heavy cavalry descend the slope, his heart turning to ice. As a commander, he understood the implications. These heavy lancers were steel behemoths designed to shatter anything in their path. Their thick armor deflected light weapons, while their lances, powered by full-speed charges, carried devastating kinetic energy. I knew his own force consisted of light cavalry. They relied on speed, mobility, and hit-and-run tactics, like a pack of wolves. They excelled at flanking, pursuit, and cutting supply lines. They were not built for a head-on collision with heavy cavalry. Their numerical advantage was useless against such force, promising only slaughter. The terrain was also against them. The enemy utilized the slope's momentum, striking like a falling steel hammer. I saw his light cavalry in the valley, slow and disorganized. Turning to flee would only expose their backs to the lances, leading to total annihilation. Desperation flashed in Unag's eyes, replaced by a ruthless resolve. He drew his saber and roared. No retreat. Tighten the ranks. Meet them head-on. He knew it was a desperate gamble, but their only chance. He hoped to use their agility to dodge the impact and engage in close-quarters combat to disrupt the enemy formation. He screamed, "Aim for the horses. Cut their legs. Get in close." Realizing there was no escape, the Solonians erupted with feral aggression, closing their ranks. They charged toward the incoming wall of steel like moths to a flame. The collision was inevitable. Boom! The impact drowned out the battlefield. I watched Leyon lead the charge, his lance piercing a Solon rider and throwing him from his horse. His lancers followed, their lances tearing through the Solonians' thin defenses. Chaos ensued. Bones shattered, metal pierced flesh, and horses screamed as the Solon line was instantly shredded. Dozens were killed or maimed, and the Solon formation collapsed. This strike broke the Solon offensive, granting the Conford line a vital reprieve. I stood stunned until I felt a sharp tug. Charlotte had retrieved my helmet and secured it firmly. She whispered urgently, "Don't freeze. The impact will hurt, but you'll survive." Before she finished, I saw a Solon horse charge, its rider raising a saber. I thrust my sword into the horse's chest. Squelch. The blade went deep, but the horse's momentum sent me flying backward. Bang! I hit the muddy, blood-soaked ground. Ignoring my pain, I curled into a ball, protecting my neck and torso as instructed. Then came the hooves. Thud, thud, clang. The heavy hooves trampled my plate armor, the force vibrating through my body. My helmet rang from a strike, but the Schmidt family's mastercrafted armor held firm. The curved, polished plates deflected the blows. The steel withstood the trampling without deforming, sparing me from serious injury. I remained a rock in the torrent, the armor isolating me from the lethal force. I saw Charlotte nearby, curled up behind her shield, enduring the same onslaught. Her armor held as well. The Solon cavalry surged past us, still aggressive. They crashed into the Conford infantry. The impact caused chaos, felling many infantrymen. However, the light cavalry lost their speed advantage once trapped in the dense infantry ranks. Their horses struggled in the mud. Several horses slipped, throwing their riders into the muck. Those who remained were trapped like cornered beasts. Conford infantry swarmed them, hacking at the horses' legs. As horses fell, the infantry descended on the riders. Some were dragged down and beaten to death with iron gauntlets. Others were stabbed to death as they tried to fight back. The cavalry were forced into a grinding, losing melee. Leyon, having completed his charge, did not linger. He pulled his reins, regrouping his lancers in the open field alongside Roland's unit. Within moments, 60 riders reformed, facing the chaos once more. Lances leveled, they prepared to strike again. I watched Unag parry a spear, his heart sinking as he looked around. His cavalry were mired in the mud, their formation shattered and slow. I watched as Unag fell to chill while Leyon's heavy lancers realigned, their cold lance tips aimed directly at his chaotic formation. "It's over," I heard Unag think, his body turning icy. I knew that light cavalry caught stationary or slow on open plains against a charging heavy unit faced nothing but slaughter. The thunderous, death knell sound of hooves returned, striking terror into every Solon cavalryman I observed. I watched Leyon's lancers charge again, targeting the Solon light cavalry struggling in the mud. "Scatter! Scatter!" I heard Unag scream, desperate to avoid the impact. It was too late. I saw the mired light cavalry could not regain speed or maneuver. Boom! I watched the steel tide crush the Solonians. Without speed or space, the light cavalry were as fragile as paper against the heavy lances. I saw lances pierce leather armor, tossing riders aside, while the horses' momentum shattered everything in their path. Screams, snapping bones, and clashing metal filled the air around me. I saw dozens of Solon cavalry fall instantly. Unag narrowly escaped a lance, though I saw his mount was wounded and reared up. I watched him look on as his men fell like wheat, paralyzed by despair. "Retreat. All forces retreat. North. Now," I heard Unag cry out, his voice cracking. Abandoning all honor and tactics, I watched him spur his wounded horse and flee north. The surviving Solon cavalry, terrified, broke ranks and followed Unag in a frantic, shameful rout before my eyes. I saw them flee without looking back, desperate to escape the death-trap mud and the terrifying lancers. From a nearby slope, I watched Ingvar observe the collapse, his face turning ashen with despair. I knew he had witnessed Unag's light cavalry launch their decisive charge. Instead, I saw them hit an invisible wall, Leyon's heavy lancers, which halted their momentum instantly. Trapped in the mud and tangled with infantry, I knew the cavalry was doomed. When the lancers turned for their second charge, I saw Unag's force shatter completely. I watched as Ingvar looked on while Unag fled, leaving his broken troops behind. I saw Leyon's cavalry refuse to pursue, wisely choosing to consolidate their victory rather than overextend against faster light horse. I saw the realization hit Ingvar like a hammer. As Unag's banners vanished and Leyon's lancers turned their gaze toward the rest of the battlefield, I saw a chilling thought strike Ingvar. With the cavalry gone, I knew he realized he was the next target. I knew his Sparrow Legion elite were decimated. He had only low morale auxiliaries left. I saw they stood no chance against the victorious, high morale Conford main force and their terrifying lancers. Damn it! I heard Ingvar curse, cold sweat drenching him. I watched him turn to his aide, shouting, "Retreat! North! Run! Abandon the supplies!" His panic was evident to me, but I knew it was too late. Before his chaotic troops could execute the order, I saw Leyon spot the wavering command flag. I watched Leyon's sharp eyes lock onto the Solon commander's position. Target the enemy commander. Charge. Crush them. I heard Leyon command, sword pointing at Ingvar. The Conford lancers, riding the high of 2 victories, roared in response to my ears. I watched them form a lethal wedge and surge toward Ingvar's retreating forces like wolves. The earth shook. The sound of hooves signaled death to the fleeing Solonians and struck terror into Ingvar's heart, which I could plainly see. I watched him look back to see the steel tide closing in, the shadow of death looming. In a desperate, foolish move, I saw Ingvar jump onto a fresh horse and try to slip away with a few guards. I knew that riding made him a visible target. Worse, I saw a loyal but dim-witted guard raise the massive Sparrow Legion battle flag to rally the troops. I saw the flag act like a beacon, guiding the lancers straight to them. There, the commander. Surround them. I watched the lancers swarm them like hounds. Ingvar whipped his horse, but I saw he could not outrun the charging cavalry. Within minutes, I saw they were surrounded. Drop your weapons. Surrender. I heard Leyon command. I watched Ingvar try to resist, but his guards were quickly cut down. I saw the flag bearer skewered by multiple lances, falling with the banner. I watched an arrow strike Ingvar's horse, throwing him to the ground. Before he could rise, I saw lances pressed against his throat. I watched Ingvar, the elite battle commander, captured in a humiliating, foolish defeat. With Unag fled and Ingvar captured, I saw the remaining Solon infantry lose all will to fight. I saw some surrender, while others fled into the wilderness, only to be rounded up by the cavalry. I witnessed the battle finally end. The sun set, leaving a blood-red glow over the ravaged land I stood upon. The field was littered with corpses, and I found the air thick with the stench of blood and smoke. I watched the Conford garrison begin clearing the field, collecting weapons and tending to the wounded. The survivors, exhausted and dazed, felt a faint, disbelieving joy that I shared. Against all odds, I knew we had survived and won. Suddenly, I saw a lone rider appear on the western ridge. The sight sent a fresh wave of panic through the exhausted Conford troops around me. I wondered if the Solonians were returning with reserves. My soldiers' brief relief vanished, replaced by profound exhaustion and despair. Many gripped their broken weapons, eyes filled with wariness and dread. Enemy attack. Prepare to fight, experienced officers shouted, instinctually trying to reorganize the chaotic ranks. Dragging their wounded bodies, the soldiers raised shields to form a sparse, desperate line. Even Leyon, who had just led a counterattack, frowned, turned his horse west, and gripped his lance. With my men in such a state, I wondered how long we could hold. The battlefield tension spiked, as if a brutal final clash were imminent. Yet, amidst the suffocating weight, the ridge line shifted dramatically. Behind the first rider, hundreds more emerged, flooding the horizon like a tide. They halted in formation, silent as mountains, their presence creating an oppressive, steel-like atmosphere. Backlit by the sunset, their armor was obscured, but the Plantagenet royal flags dancing in the wind were unmistakable. Reinforcements. The kingdom's reinforcements. A cry erupted, igniting the Conford garrison with ecstatic relief. Amidst the joy, near the corpse-strewn front lines, I watched Charlotte scramble up, ignoring the blood on her face, searching for a familiar figure. Her heart hammered with terror, she feared finding me dead. Every fallen suit of plate armor made her heart skip a beat. Finally, near a pile of mud-caked bodies, I, a blood-stained iron can, moved. I struggled, slowly pushing myself up with my arms. Recognizing my unique armor, Charlotte cried, "Carl." She rushed over, supporting my swaying frame, and carefully removing my scratched helmet. Beneath it, My face was pale, weary, yet relieved. I coughed, my eyes drifting toward the reinforcements on the ridge. I smiled hoarsely. See, Charlotte? I told you the Count's reinforcements would come. Overwhelmed by fear and relief, Charlotte choked out. What good is that now? If Leyon hadn't arrived, we would have died. You almost. She couldn't finish, but her tight grip on my arm betrayed her lingering terror. The reinforcements began to move. Disciplined infantry and cavalry descended the slope, taking control of the Conford defense. With this fresh force, Conford seemed to regain its soul, standing tall once more. Charlotte used a dagger to carefully cut the blood-soaked straps of my armor. She worked with gentle focus, fearing to touch my wounds. As we were close, my gaze lingered on her face. Her golden hair was matted with sweat and blood, her nose smudged with dirt, and her usually sharp blue eyes were narrowed in concentration. Moved, I leaned forward and kissed her mud-stained cheek. Charlotte froze, her dagger stopping mid-cut. She looked up, eyes wide, her face flushing crimson. Trying to regain composure, she scolded. Hey, you're injured, stop moving. She tapped my liner with the dagger handle. Move again, and I might accidentally cut you. A horse galloped up, stopping beside us and kicking up mud. A middle-aged officer in fine chain mail and a Plantagenet surcoat dismounted. Charlotte saluted. Sir Kalen, you led the rescue? Thank you for arriving in time. Kalen scanned the battlefield, his tone stern. I served the Count. I arrived just in time. I would have had to answer for it if anything happened to you, Knight Charlotte. He looked at me. And this is? Charlotte stepped forward proudly. Sir, this is Lord Karl von Schmidt. He saved Leyon's scouts, held the line against the Solonians, and repelled them. He won this battle even without your help. Kalen raised an eyebrow, observing my exhausted face and the fanatical devotion of the surviving soldiers. Looking at the mountain of Solonian corpses, he acknowledged her claim. The garrison had dealt the Solonians a devastating blow on our own. Charlotte added, though, Sir Kalen, your march was slow. The enemy commander escaped. This could have been a perfect annihilation, just as Karl predicted. Charlotte, I interrupted, my voice weak but firm. I nodded to Kalen. Sir Kalen, thank you for the support. Conford is saved, and we are grateful. The battlefield is unpredictable. We have secured the most important victory. Kalen chuckled, his tone softening. It seems our arrival is a grievance. My apologies, Knight Charlotte. The command was indeed lacking. He looked at me with paternal concern. But, lad, you should rest. You look. Before he could finish, my willpower collapsed. Exhaustion and the backlash of my injuries overwhelmed me, and I slumped forward. My lord, Karl, Brendan and Richter caught me as I lost consciousness. Charlotte cried out, her annoyance replaced by frantic worry. Kalen ordered his adjutant. Get a medic. Use the best medicine. Take care of this brave young lord. His tone held genuine respect. I opened my eyes. I saw the familiar ceiling of my bedroom in Conford Castle. I tried to sit up, but a wave of agonizing soreness forced me back down. Gritting my teeth against the pain, I finally managed to prop myself up against the headboard. My blood-stained armor was gone, replaced by clean linen pajamas. Sunset light filtered through the window, and the room smelled of herbs, a peaceful contrast to the hellish battlefield of yesterday. The door opened, and my steward, Edgar, entered with a tray of hot soup, bread, and water. You're awake, my lord. Edgar smiled with relief as I sat up. The medic said you were just exhausted. I brought you some food. I nodded, my throat parched. I took a few sips of water, feeling a slight relief. How long was I out? I asked, my voice raspy. About 19 hours. It's the afternoon of the second day, Edgar replied, placing a tray by the bed. Please eat. I drank the warm broth, feeling my strength slowly return. As I ate, I signaled for Edgar to report. Edgar stood by the bed and reported. Count Rochefort's reinforcements have arrived. Sir Kalen's vanguard of 400 cavalry saved us yesterday, followed by 1,000 infantry under Sir Leyon. They are now encamped outside Conford. The Solonians won't dare attack again soon. I nodded. This was expected. Count Rochefort wouldn't do things by halves. Edgar's tone darkened. Our casualties: 87 dead, 22 severely wounded, and nearly 100 with minor injuries. Almost everyone is hurt. My hand paused. Despite my expectations, the heavy toll stung. These weren't just numbers. They were lives and the very foundation of my territory. Edgar shifted the topic. Sir Brendan has drafted a recruitment and training plan. It's in your study. You don't need to read it now, Edgar smiled. In short, he believes this battle, while costly, has its silver linings. The survivors have been tempered by the cruelest of trials. Their combat skills, willpower, and loyalty to you have reached a new level. Furthermore, Conford's victory against superior numbers will spread across the northern frontier, boosting our reputation and attracting more warriors to our cause. Edgar continued, Brendan's core strategy is to treat these battle-hardened veterans as our most precious seeds. By moving them from the front lines to serve as instructors and junior officers, we can rapidly train new recruits and preserve our combat traditions. He suggests a system where veterans who have earned enough merit can retire from the front to take up training roles. This preserves our backbone and ensures efficient growth. As you often say, modern warfare isn't decided by individual valor, but by collective discipline and training. I looked impressed. I set down my spoon. Brendan's plan is excellent and fits our needs perfectly. These veterans are worth more than gold. Execute the plan. Yes, my lord, Edgar replied. What about the Solonians? Edgar's tone turned proud. The enemy force consisted of two parts. First, Unag's 400 light cavalry. After 2 charges by Commander Leyon, nearly 100 were killed, and the rest fled north. Second, Ingvar's 900-man mixed infantry legion, including 562 elite Solon warriors, 200 auxiliaries, and 100 slave soldiers. Crucially, the 562 elite warriors were almost entirely wiped out by our frontline defense and flanking cavalry. Only a few escaped, the auxiliaries and slaves scattered. Over 400 died in the melee, including 83 berserkers. Another 200 were cut down during the retreat. We captured enough weapons and armor to re-equip several platoons. Most importantly, we captured the Solon battle commander, Ingvar, the first high-ranking officer captured by the Plantagenet army in over a decade. He added regretfully, however, as you predicted, the main cavalry force escaped. Sir Kaelin's pursuit was too slow, which Sir Charlotte seems unhappy about. I smiled. The battlefield is unpredictable. To annihilate 600 elites and capture a commander with our limited forces is an undeniable victory. It will make Harold suffer and show the North that the Solonians can be defeated. I knew this victory had bought Conford vital space and prestige. After eating, I cleaned up and stepped into a prepared bath. The warm water washed away the blood and fatigue, leaving me feeling reborn and refreshed. Dressed in clean clothes, I walked into the quiet Lord's Hall. The hall was empty, save for the crackling fireplace. Sunset lights stretched across the floor. My gaze fell on the Lord's chair, where Charlotte sat. She wore simple hunting attire, her blonde hair tied back loosely. She rested her chin on her hand, watching me with a playful, gentle glint in her blue eyes. I walked up to her and bowed, teasing, "My lady, do you have any orders?" Charlotte laughed, then feigned a stern expression. "Karl von Schmidt, you committed a rude and overstepping act against a knight and a count's daughter yesterday. Do you know your crime?" I stepped closer, leaning in to look her in the eyes. "Then, my dear knight, how do you intend to punish me?" Charlotte blushed, but didn't back down. "I'm still considering. Perhaps I should let you taste a surprise attack yourself." She reached out, pulled me close, and kissed me. The kiss began playfully but deepened into a passionate expression of survival and shared intimacy. I responded warmly, holding her waist and stroking her hair. We eventually pulled apart, foreheads touching, breathing heavily in the firelight. Charlotte looked at me, her tone turning serious and slightly fearful. "You know, Karl, your plan almost failed." She poked my chest. "I don't know where you got your intel, but the reinforcements arrived much later than you expected." Her voice dropped. "If Leyon hadn't charged like a madman and disrupted their formation, we might have all died before help arrived." Her words pierced my composure. My expression dimmed with guilt. I looked out at the twilight. "Yes," I said heavily. "It was my mistake. I miscalculated and relied too much on uncertain reinforcements. If not for Leyon, I would have killed us all. 87 warriors, lost because of my poor judgment. Charlotte's playful expression vanished, replaced by genuine heartache as she realized she had touched a raw nerve. She stood, gripping my hand firmly. No, Carl, I'm sorry. You did enough. You led everyone to the end. In the chaos of battle, no plan is perfect. No survivor blames you. They died protecting their home and comrades. They were heroes. Don't drown in guilt. Honor them by protecting Conford even better. Feeling her warmth and resolve, I took a deep breath, suppressing my turmoil. I looked at her, the weight in my heart lifting slightly. I squeezed her hand back and nodded. You're right, Charlotte. Thank you. Sensing my relief, Charlotte shifted to a lighter tone. Besides, you've achieved a great victory. The king will surely reward you handsomely when the report reaches the capital. She winked. I'm not working for free, you know. I expect half the reward. The mention of merit sparked a thought in me. You're right. With this victory, I should finally be qualified to formally propose to your father, shouldn't I? What? Charlotte recoiled, stunned. I looked at her seriously. I want to marry you. You said you would if Conford grew strong. After this battle, Conford has truly established itself in the northern frontier. We crushed the Solonian cavalry and decimated their main infantry. Isn't that enough to silence the critics at the capital? Can I marry a count's daughter now? Charlotte stiffened, her blue eyes wide with shock and a hint of nervous disbelief. Then, her face lit up with joy. She lifted her chin, regaining her composure. Karl von Schmidt, is that how you propose? It's improper. You must formally petition my father, Count Rochefort, not just tell me. Her rebuke couldn't hide her beaming smile. I chuckled, realizing my haste. My apologies. Do you think the Count will agree? Charlotte's expression turned thoughtful. I don't know, she admitted, fidgeting with my buttons. Marriage is complex. You are a Schmidt, and my father's stance. It's not just about us. She understood the weight of noble alliances. Yet, she brightened again, looking at me with encouragement. But your achievements are undeniable. You saved his cavalry, held Conford, and crippled the Solonians. He will have to consider your request seriously. She urged me on. Do it soon. I'll put in a good word for you. Her blush and eager eyes washed away my remaining doubts. I squeezed her hand. Agreed. Once the situation stabilizes, I will formally petition the Count. That's better. Charlotte smiled radiantly. She leaned into me, whispering, Don't take too long, though. After our moment in the Lord's Hall, we stepped out of the castle. The afternoon sun cut through the gloom, though the air still carried the scent of blood and herbs. The semi-subterranean houses, once used by Leyon's cavalry, were now repurposed. They were filled with groaning wounded, tended to by medics and village women. Leyon's cavalry had moved their camp to the mountain base, yielding the space to those in need. Sir Brendan approached, looking exhausted but sharp. He saluted. My lord, the wounded are settled in the barracks and the semi-subterranean houses. 43 are severely injured, but thanks to the militia potion, their conditions are stable. The medics say they are healing faster than expected, a blessing from the goddess. The lightly wounded will recover with rest. His voice deepened. We've confirmed 87 dead. Mr. Moore is overseeing the burial at a sunny slope at the mountain's foot. We will erect a monument. I looked toward the site in silence. Every number represented a life lost and a heavy cost to Conford. I nodded for Brendan to continue. Brendan gestured toward the plains. There is one more thing, my lord. We stepped outside the walls. The plains were no longer desolate. They were filled with rows of tents. The camp looked like a forest of white mushrooms. Banners bearing the Rochefort lion crest and the Plantagenet royal flag flew proudly. Well-armored infantry patrolled the perimeter, their gear glinting in the light. Smoke rose from the campfires in the morning air. The reinforcements have arrived, Brendan said with relief. A reinforced infantry battalion of 1,200 elites. With them here, Conford is secure. The Solonians won't dare attack again. 2 cavalry battalions are also patrolling the perimeter. Brendan frowned slightly. However, Sir Kalen and Sir Loron mentioned they marched here at high speed and are low on supplies. They intend to return to France City soon. He looked at me. I suggested we share our own stores to support them as they came to our aid. Brendan noted with a mix of helplessness and admiration that the two knights had strictly refused any supplies, citing Count Rochefort's orders that Conford's grain must remain untouched. All supplies were to be self-sufficient to avoid burdening the war-torn town. I glanced at Charlotte, touched by the Count's consideration. It seems the Count truly values me. Charlotte beamed with pride. Of course. My father is always fair. I smiled at Brendan. We appreciate the Count's kindness, but we cannot let our allies go unrewarded for saving us. I will gift them a batch of grain in my name, ostensibly to support their stay for deterrence and reconstruction. I will explain everything to the Count personally. Brendan agreed, impressed by my thoughtfulness. I invited Charlotte to join me in thanking Sir Caelan and his men. Charlotte scoffed. Benefactors? If they hadn't been so slow, we could have annihilated the Solon cavalry ourselves. I patted her shoulder gently. Regardless, their arrival broke the siege and shattered the Solonians' morale. That timing was crucial. Charlotte grumbled, but followed me, always supportive of my decisions. After Brendan handled the supplies, Charlotte and I walked through the camp toward the Plantagenet command tent. Soldiers stopped to offer respectful, grateful salutes to me. The fame of the battle at Conford had spread among the reinforcements. We were ushered into a large tent. Inside, Sir Caelan and the infantry commander, Sir Leyon, were reviewing a map. Leyon was also there, looking weary but upright. Leyon met my gaze with a nod, his expression a mix of gratitude and scrutiny. Sir Caelan greeted us formally. Lord Carl, Lady Charlotte, I trust you have recovered? I have, I replied. I am here to thank you for lifting the siege. Charlotte offered a stiff, polite bow. Sir Leyon praised my courage in holding off the Solonians against such odds. I cut to the chase. I hear your supplies are low. It is not the way of Conford, or myself, to let allies leave hungry. I offered a donation of grain from my own reserves. This will allow your men to rest and deter the Solonians while we rebuild, and help your troops recover from their forced march. I will take full responsibility with the Count, I added. Caelan and Leyon exchanged relieved, delighted glances. They had been struggling with the Count's strict orders. Sending exhausted men back hungry would have caused unrest. My offer provided them with a perfect solution. Thank you, Lord Carl. Your generosity is truly appreciated, Caelan exclaimed. Leyon nodded in agreement, the tension in the room dissipating. I turned serious. There is another matter, the official report of this battle. Caelan, Leyon, and Leyon stiffened. It was time to discuss the division of military merit. How the spoils and kills were reported would determine their future rewards. We needed to align our stories before the Count saw the report. All three officers glanced at Charlotte. Was it appropriate for the Count's daughter to hear this? I remained calm. Charlotte is one of us. She will not interfere. Charlotte looked on, confused by the unspoken tension. The knights reluctantly accepted her presence. I pointed to the map. We have over 600 Solonian heads and have captured their battle commander, Ingvar. This is too much for Conford alone to claim. It should be shared among all who fought. I proposed a plan. Sir Caelan and Sir Leyon, your arrival deterred the enemy, so you shall each claim credit for 100 Solonian kills. Leyon, your cavalry's charges were decisive. You shall claim credit for 200 Solonian cavalry kills. As for the capture of Commander Ingvar, that honor belongs entirely to your men, Leyon. Caelan and Leyon were stunned by the generous offer. This would be a massive boost to their military records. Lord Carl, this is too much. Caelan said, though clearly thrilled. It is deserved, I insisted. Without your arrival, this victory would not have been possible. Leyon accepted the terms. I knew this was a shrewd investment. By gifting these honors, I secured the favor of the Count's trusted men, ensuring future support for Conford. The agreement was settled to everyone's satisfaction. The atmosphere turned festive, and Caelan invited us to dinner. I asked casually, is the Count still in France City? I hope to visit him soon to express my gratitude and seek his counsel on a private matter. I glanced at Charlotte, who stood beside me. Charlotte, sensing my gaze, blushed and looked away. Sir Caelan confirmed. Count Rochefort is in France City and is deeply concerned with the war at Conford. This news rippled through me and Charlotte. It was good that the Count was nearby, saving us travel time. However, we now faced the daunting prospect of meeting the northern frontier's ruler, with our future hanging in the balance. Dinner ended in a tense, silent atmosphere. We walked toward the castle under torchlight, the cool night air failing to soothe our heavy hearts. We knew this meeting would be more than a report. It would be a negotiation regarding our future and the fate of Conford. I prepared to break the silence to comfort the nervous girl. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. "Lord Carl, I must speak with you privately." Startled, I turned to see who it was. It was Leyon, his expression complex and resolute. Confused but composed, I replied, "Let's talk inside the castle." Leyon followed us in silence. The trio walked to the castle without a word, our footsteps echoing in the night. We reached the main hall, lit only by the dying embers of the fireplace. I sat at the central table and gestured for Leyon to sit opposite me. Charlotte excused herself to wash, leaving the two of us alone. Once she was gone, Leyon spoke directly. "Lord Carl, I request to join your service. Will you ask the Count to release me to you?" I was stunned, doubting my own ears. Leyon, a promising young cavalry commander under Count Rockefort, wanted to defect to my fledgling territory? My mind raced. I was ecstatic. Leyon was a rare, experienced cavalry expert. Despite his impulsive nature, Leyon possessed genuine command ability and courage. In the northern frontier, cavalry mobility often decided battles. I desperately needed someone to train and lead my own cavalry. Brendan, Richter, and Roland were skilled in infantry and management, but none were cavalry specialists. Leyon would fill this void, but the risk was immense. Asking for the Count's daughter's hand while poaching his best commander seemed like taking advantage of the Count's generosity. The Count would surely be furious. This could jeopardize both the marriage and the alliance between Conford and France City. Yet, such talent was rare. If I missed this chance, Leyon would be lost to the France City hierarchy forever. As for the marriage, my bond with Charlotte was strong. My recent victory in defending Conford and saving the Count's cavalry served as a powerful dowry. Even if the marriage were delayed, our relationship remained secure. I tapped the table, eyes sharp. "This is unexpected. Why choose my unestablished territory over your bright future with the Count?" Leyon's eyes darkened with pain. "The Count has been kind, but the Solonians destroyed my family's castle and caused my father's death. I cannot forget that blood feud. The Count's strategy is defensive and cautious. There are few opportunities for the aggressive counterattacks I need." He continued passionately. "But you, Lord Carl, have built everything from scratch, facing the Solon soldiers head-on with a daring, offensive spirit. That is where I belong. Please, help me avenge my father." I understood. Leyon sought the aggressive, revenge-driven path that only I offered. I replied solemnly, "I appreciate your talent and understand your motive. I welcome you, but the decision rests with the Count. I will try to persuade him, but I cannot guarantee success. Do you understand?" Leyon looked disappointed but grateful. He saluted. "I understand. Thank you for the opportunity, regardless of the outcome." He knew I was taking a significant political risk. "Wait for my word after I speak with the Count," I said. Leyon saluted and strode out. Shortly after, Charlotte returned, her hair damp from washing. Seeing me alone, she asked, "What did Leyon want?" I sighed and recounted the request. Charlotte gasped. "He wants to defect? That's bold. Will my father be angry?" "That's why I'm worried," I said, rubbing my temples. "I'm trying to marry his daughter while poaching his best commander." Charlotte chuckled. "Actually, it's quite interesting. Even Leyon knows you're the better prospect." She nudged me playfully. "Go for it. I'll help you convince my father. I'll tell him Leyon insisted on following you." She offered whimsical suggestions to lighten my mood. Seeing her earnest attempt to cheer me up, I felt a surge of warmth. I pulled her close, resting my head on her shoulder, and whispered, "Thank you, Charlotte. With you here, nothing seems so terrifying." Charlotte blushed, muttering, "Who let you lean on me? My hair is still wet." Yet, she quietly squeezed my hand in silent support. We sat in the silent hall, our shadows intertwined by the fireplace's glow. A peaceful, tender atmosphere filled the room until Charlotte finally stirred. She nudged me, shyly concerned. "Go take a hot bath and sleep." You scared everyone when you collapsed yesterday. I remained unmoved. I've slept for 10 hours. I'm not tired. Charlotte rolled her eyes. So, do you want a bedtime story? I smiled. No story needed. Why don't you sleep with me? Just resting together is enough. My voice was low, filled with anticipation. Charlotte jumped up, hands on her hips, feigning anger. In your dreams, Karl von Schmidt. We aren't even married. I stood and took her hands, pleading. I know, but we face Count Rockefort soon, and the Solonians might return. I just want you near so I can rest. I promise, just sleeping, nothing else. My vulnerability touched her deeply. Recalling my bloody struggle and collapse yesterday, her heart softened. She bit her lip, whispering, just sleeping. And keep your clothes on. If you try anything, I'll stab you. I raised my hands, swearing, I promise. Completely well-behaved. Blushing, Charlotte hurried toward the corridor, calling back, go wash up. I'll wait in your room. Her voice was barely audible. I washed quickly, my fatigue vanishing in my excitement. I hurried to my bedroom and pushed the door open. Charlotte was already there, illuminated by a dim oil lamp. She sat stiffly on a chair by the window, head bowed, her red ears betraying her nervousness. Seeing me, she looked up like a startled deer, her eyes shimmering with shy anticipation. I closed the door, sealing us in intimate silence. The playful atmosphere vanished, replaced by a heart-pounding, ambiguous tension. I sat on the bed, watching her quietly. Seeing her shy beauty, I was overwhelmed with emotion. Memories of my arrival in this world, the struggle to build Conford, and my journey from a lonely outsider to a leader flashed through my mind. I thought of my past life, the lonely commutes and cold, empty apartment. There had been no one waiting for me then. Now, despite the threats, I had a fortress to defend, loyal subjects, and a girl who offered me warmth. Filled with gratitude, I knelt before her. Charlotte looked away, whispering, "What are you doing?" I didn't answer, gently stroking her golden hair. I pulled her into a soft embrace, her head resting on my shoulder. Charlotte stiffened, then relaxed, our heartbeats sinking. I whispered into her ear, "Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you for being here, for trusting me, and for giving me a reason to fight in this cold world." Charlotte buried her face in my neck, hugging me back. Words were unnecessary. Our embrace said everything. The lamplight wrapped around us, shielding us from the world outside. The next day, I convened a meeting in the Lord's Hall to discuss post-war affairs. On one side sat the officers, led by the veteran knight Brendan, including Richter, Roland, and new faces. Among them were Miller, Creek, and Musketeer Squad Sergeant Otto. They sat stiffly, showing both excitement and awe at being in the seat of power. On the other side were the civil officials, Scribe Moll, Edgar, Hans, and their assistants. I began. The war is over, but the scars remain. Today, we conduct a comprehensive review. I turned to the officers. Brendan, organize a bottom-up review starting with the squad sergeants. Record tactics, casualties, coordination errors, and acts of valor. Platoon leaders will summarize these for their units. Finally, you will review these reports and present me with a summary of lessons learned and equipment needs. Brendan nodded solemnly. Understood, my lord. We will ensure no valuable lesson is lost. I added, be pragmatic. Face our mistakes so we can build a foundation for future victories. I shifted topics. Now, regarding rewards and pensions. Hans, is the plan for the fallen ready? Hans stood, handing over a parchment. Yes, my lord. Fallen soldiers' families will receive a lump sum and 3 years of tax relief. The disabled will receive pensions and light work assignments. I reviewed the plan. The principles are sound, but increase the pension by 30%. We must honor their sacrifice to inspire others. Hans bowed. I then asked Brendan, how is the tally of war merits progressing? Brendan hesitated, explaining that the chaotic, close-quarters nature of the battle made it impossible to accurately track individual kills. He noted that they could only offer rough estimates based on battlefield sweeps and witness accounts, making precise tallies unfeasible. I nodded, having anticipated this difficulty. I understood that in this era, casualty reporting was notoriously imprecise and prone to dispute. This highlights a flaw in our system, I remarked. As our army grows, We need a more efficient and rigorous method for recording merit. I propose decentralizing the auxiliary units, embedding them directly into frontline squads. Beyond their usual duties, their primary task will be to identify, verify, and record enemy heads taken by their respective units during or immediately after combat. Addressing the potential moral objections, I argued that while head counting is brutal, it remains the most objective standard for measuring collective and individual performance. By assigning this responsibility to auxiliaries within each squad, we minimize confusion and reporting errors. I quickly cautioned, however, this is not the sole metric. Soldiers must not prioritize heads over tactical objectives, formation integrity, or teamwork. I emphasized that other feats, breaching walls, capturing banners, killing enemy commanders, or saving comrades, are equally, if not more, meritorious. Rewards will be comprehensive. We prioritize heads, but the ultimate goal is victory. I outline my reward philosophy. Reward the collective first, then the individual. A top-performing platoon gets a bonus, with further incentives for the best-performing squad, and then the standout individual. Our soldiers must understand that collective victory is paramount. We train for discipline and coordination, not individual heroics. The officers, especially veterans like Brendan, nodded in agreement. They recognized that a cohesive unit is far more effective than one driven by individual glory-seeking. I tasked Mr. Moore, Edgar, Brendan, and Hans with drafting the specific, actionable regulations. The trio accepted the order in unison. I then turned to Old Moore regarding the funeral arrangements for the fallen. Old Moore reported that graves were prepared on a sunny slope, and a funeral for all fallen soldiers would be held the following morning, attended by the entire territory. I stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Tomorrow, we honor our heroes. The meeting is adjourned. Return to your duties. The officers departed with solemn determination. The third morning was gray, cold, and misty. A crowd gathered on a hill in Conford before the newly excavated gravesite. Nearly all the subjects had gathered to pay their respects. The soldiers stood in disciplined, polished ranks. The silence was broken only by stifled sobs as they faced two large, rectangular graves. One held the Plantagenet defenders from the old battle for Conford. The adjacent grave was for the 87 heroes who died defending the new Conford. Bodies wrapped in white cloth were lowered slowly and gently into the cold earth. Each placement struck the survivors like a hammer blow, causing some to collapse in grief. As they mourned fathers, sons, and brothers, the survivors supported one another in shared sorrow. I and my officers stood by the graveside in somber reflection. I watched Charlotte stand nearby, pale and tearful. I saw Kaelin, Sir Loran, and Leyon also attend, watching with solemnity. The atmosphere was suffocating as the 87 fallen were finally laid to rest. I stepped down into the grave pit. Edgar and Brendan handed me a large, folded flag of the Plantagenet kingdom. I, along with the others, carefully unfolded the blood-stained, battle-worn banner over the bodies. The flag draped over them like a final shroud of glory. Sir Brendan stepped forward, his voice trembling with emotion as he addressed the crowd. We gather to honor our heroes who fought until their last breath against the Solonians. They defended our homes, protected our families, and repelled the enemy with their lives. They are the pride of the Plantagenet warriors in Conford. Their names shall live forever. He added, Lord Carl promises that when the church is built, a monument will be erected with every hero's name inscribed upon it. The announcement sent a ripple of awe through the crowd. To have one's name inscribed on a monument was an unprecedented honor for common soldiers. I stepped forward and gave a sharp, powerful command. Salute. The soldiers snapped to attention, hands raised to their temples or pressed over their hearts. Otto, the musketeer squad chief, ordered, Fire. 30 musketeers fired 3 volleys into the sky. The deafening reports echoed through the valley like a tragic hymn, startling the birds. As the smoke cleared, I commanded, Order, and the soldiers lowered their hands. I took a shovel and cast the first handful of earth onto the flag. The officers, soldiers, and subjects followed, filling the grave in silence. They moved slowly, careful not to disturb the resting heroes. The earth covered the flag and the fallen, forming a new mound. Finally, stonemasons placed a rough-hewn monument at the head of the grave. The monument bore a concise, bold inscription: "Here lie 87 heroes of Conford, fallen in the 7th year of Heinrich 11, May. Their courage endures, their deeds are immortal. Both the past garrison and these new souls serve as the shield and sword of Conford." As the living read the words aloud, I watched as many were moved to tears, deeply touched by the solemn tribute. This unprecedented, grand funeral I had organized profoundly shook everyone present. They had never imagined a noble lord would invest such effort and honor into the funerals of common soldiers. For the lower classes, death was a brutal, mundane reality, often rewarded with nothing more than a straw mat and a shallow grave. Collective burials, flags, gun salutes, and the promise of having their names carved into the church were honors beyond their wildest dreams. A profound sense of belonging and awe took root in every heart. Watching me, their young Lord Karl, participate in the burial with solemn reverence, the soldiers looked upon me with newfound devotion and a vow of loyalty. Whispers of "following such a lord is worth dying for, and we must hold Conford" echoed through the ranks. My actions significantly bolstered the territory's morale and loyalty. People realized their sacrifices were valued and would not be forgotten. This was more powerful than any hollow slogan or speech. The funeral concluded. I watched as Roderick and his surviving brothers offered a final salute and left the cemetery with heavy steps. The sunset stretched their shadows long across the gravel path, the silence broken only by the sound of their boots. They reached the barracks at dusk. Sergeant William waited at the entrance, his expression grim, yet he patted Roderick's shoulder to offer comfort. "Take a breath," William said hoarsely. "Lord Karl has canceled training tonight. We're holding a squad debrief." The men sat in a circle on the floor. William pulled out a notebook and charcoal pencil. "The battle is over, but the work remains," William said. "The Lord wants a summary of our gains and losses. Speak up, good or bad, so we can improve our chances of survival next time." Silence filled the room, heavy with grief and exhaustion. William broke the silence. "Mark, start us off." Mark scratched his head. "My matchlock musket kept going out during the fight. A Sorin barbarian almost reached me before a brother covered me." He hesitated, then added, "The musketeer squad uses flintlock muskets that don't have that issue. Could we get those instead?" William eyed him. "Flintlocks. They're complex and delicate. You'd be punished if you broke one. You think you're as skilled as the musketeers." Despite his words, William noted it down. "Request for flintlock upgrade," Mark's suggestion. "I'll report it." The tension eased slightly. "Oliver, your turn." Oliver, a veteran, spoke up. "First, the coordination between musketeers and pikemen is off. We need clearer signals so the musketeers don't block our advance. Second," he continued, "we need better armor. The Solonians' plate armor is terrifying. Our leather is like paper. Even chain mail would be better. Also, those on the front lines should have the best armor and the highest pay. It's unfair that everyone gets the same when some of us are risking more." William recorded the feedback without comment. "Roderick," William said, looking at the quiet youth. "You speak too." Roderick struggled to find his voice, still reeling from the loss of his comrades. William softened his tone. "Speak freely. Lord Karl saw your bravery. You'll be rewarded. It's for the good of the squad." Roderick looked down. "I agree about the armor. When Lord Karl had me wear the captured Solonian plate, I felt secure. Without it, I feel panicked." A few men chuckled, teasing him about his love for plate armor. "Shut it," William barked. "Roderick was the bravest among us, and the Lord saw it himself. You have no right to laugh." William pulled out a small cloth bag. Inside was a metal 5-pointed star medal, engraved with the Conford crest. "Look," William said with unprecedented gravity. "This is the Conford Hero Medal, designed by Lord Karl himself." He handed it to Roderick. "This one has a slight defect, so keep it. Tomorrow, the Lord will hold an official award ceremony for you heroes. However," William added, "the official medals must be turned in after the ceremony for safekeeping. We can't have you lot losing them." Roderick reached out, stunned. William pinned the warm medal to Roderick's dirty uniform. It caught the dim light of the barracks, shining brightly. The room fell silent, the teasing replaced by respect and envy. Looking at the medal and his comrades, Roderick felt a warmth that eased his grief. He instinctively straightened his back. In Frostguard, Unag finally returned with his shattered cavalry. They had abandoned their gear, and many horses had died from exhaustion. The unit was decimated. Of the 400 light cavalry that set out, fewer than 300 remained. Yet, they were not met with immediate fury. After hearing the report, Harold, though grim, only demoted Unag by 1 rank. Harold was a ruthless leader, but he was also rational and fair in his rewards and punishments. He knew the defeat wasn't due to Unag's tactics, which had successfully executed the initial mission. The failure stemmed from misjudging the Conford garrison and the unexpected scale of the Plantagenet reinforcements. That Unag managed to escape with 300 men was a testament to his capability. Harsh punishment would only demoralize his warriors. As for Ingvar and the Sparrow Legion, Harold understood they had faced overwhelming odds and superior defenses. He marked this debt against Conford and its young lord me. Inside the Lord's Hall in Frostguard, a critical Legion council began. Harold sat upon his throne, eyes burning with cold resolve. 8 subordinates sat before him. These were not the main Legion commanders, who were already positioned at Blackstone Pass and Wharton's Castle for the upcoming raids. Present were rearguard generals and the upper echelons of the Sparrow Legion. Among them were Commander Ulf, elite captains, a Tier 3 knight, and a cold-cloaked mage. This was the Legion Council, the Solon tribe's highest decision-making body. While Harold held final authority, these 8 representatives exerted significant influence. How do you view the new Plantagenets at Conford and our recent setback? Harold asked, breaking the silence. Stark, a burly Tier 3 knight, roared. It is a disgrace. A humiliation for Solon warriors. Over 600 men lost to a tiny outpost. I should lead a force to crush it myself. 5, 10 times if needed. We must grind that stone pile to dust and turn that young lord's skull into a wine cup to show them the cost of offending Solon. Sigurd, a sharp-eyed strategist, interjected, Stark's courage is admirable, but our main forces are committed to the southern raids. What of Commander Ulf's Sparrow Legion, still stationed near Frostguard? All eyes turned to Ulf. Ulf was idly playing with a dagger, seemingly uninterested in the strategy. He looked up, lazily shifting his gaze to Harold. Harold understood Sigurd's intent, but shook his head. No, the Sparrow Legion must monitor France City. Count Rochefort's swift rescue of Conford proves he values that outpost highly. If we commit the Sparrow Legion and fail to take it quickly, France City's garrison could strike our rear. We cannot repeat our mistakes. Harold's logic was sharp. He glanced at Ulf. Ulf shrugged, indifferent to the decision. Sigurd persisted. But Conford is only 200 kilometers from Frostguard, right under our noses. If left to recruit refugees and fortify, it will become a grave threat. Even the remnants of the Plantagenets on the Iron Islands were hunted down by the previous Khan. Can we ignore this thorn at our door? The generals murmured in agreement. Ulf finally stopped playing with his knife. He looked at Harold, his voice flat. The Sparrow Legion obeys the leader. If you say attack, we crush them. If you say siege, we starve them. He deferred the decision back to Harold. Harold appreciated Ulf's unwavering support. He tapped his throne, deciding, Conford must be removed, but not now. It is June. The southern raids are vital for winter survival. Main legions cannot be recalled. Ulf. Present, Ulf replied. Your mission remains to watch France City, but you will also blockade Conford. Cut their supply lines, harass their fields, and drain their morale. Do not launch a full-scale assault without my orders. After the autumn harvest, when our main forces return with spoils, we will gather the full Solon army and crush that fortress once and for all. Understood. Ulf stood. Stark grumbled but accepted the strategy. Days later, Sir Laurent informed me that the army was ready to depart. I gathered my officers, Brynden, Richter, Roland, Edgar, and Maul. In the Lord's Hall, I announced my departure to meet Count Rochefort. Maul will handle administration. Richter and Roland assist Brynden with training and fortifications. Hans manage logistics. Edgar finalize the refugee settlement and spring planting plans. Consult each other and send word to France City if a crisis arises. Yes, my lord, they replied. I then met with Leyon, whose cavalry was ready. Leyon, I remember your request. I will find the right time to speak to the count. Leyon nodded solemnly. I understand. Thank you for the opportunity. My men will escort you. Leyon felt a mix of anxiety and hope. His fate was at a turning point. The morning was bright. The gates opened, and Charlotte and I rode out, followed by Leyon's cavalry. Brendan and the others watched us leave. Below the hill, Sir Kalen and Sir Laurent had the main force ready. Ready? Kalen asked. I nodded, and the massive army began to move. Infantry marched in the center, cavalry on the flanks, with me and my group in the secure core. We marched southeast toward France City. The northern wasteland was quiet. The Solonians had retreated. The army moved with the disciplined efficiency of the Plantagenet elite. I watched Charlotte, who felt a growing sense of security while riding behind me. She rode close to talk, sharing details about her father and France City. Leyon remained silent, vigilantly guarding the perimeter. I remained calm, mentally preparing my strategy for the meeting with the Count. I observed the Count's elite troops, impressed by their equipment, discipline, and organization. 2 days later, a massive city appeared on the horizon. France City, the northern capital and heart of the Great Wall's defenses, had finally been reached. The army slowed to undergo inspection. Charlotte and I exchanged glances, our expressions a mix of gravity, anticipation, and tension. The final test was beginning. The gates opened to reveal Count Rochefort waiting with his officials and guards. Though he had read the reports of the victory at Conford, the governor was visibly moved to see the triumphant army return. He scanned the ranks of Kalen and Laurent. The soldiers were orderly, high-spirited, and remarkably intact. The Count was pleased. These elite troops were his most valuable assets, and their survival was the best possible news. His gaze shifted to the wagons in the center. They were piled with the heads of Solonians, treated with lime, but still smelling of blood. Behind them were the prisoners, including the captured Solon battle commander, Ingvar. Seeing the sheer volume of trophies in person was a visceral experience. The visual impact and the sense of glory caused the Count's heart to race, a satisfied smile forming on his lips. Finally, his eyes settled on Charlotte and me at the rear. Seeing his daughter safe and hardened by battle, the Count felt a great weight lift from his heart. His gaze toward me was complex, filled with appreciation, inquiry, and a hint of sentiment. I dismounted and signaled Charlotte to follow as we approached the Count. I saluted, "My lord, Lord of Conford, Karl von Schmidt, reporting for duty." Charlotte followed, voice tight, "Father, my lord." The Count ignored his daughter for a moment, stepping forward to clap me on the shoulder. "Well done, Karl. You held Conford, crushed the barbarians, and brought glory to the Plantagenet name." He ordered his scribe to register every single Solon head as proof of merit. Only then did he turn to Charlotte with a soft nod, gesturing for us to follow him to the governor's mansion. Walking through the familiar corridors, I felt a sense of déjà vu, recalling my first meeting with Charlotte months ago. Back then, she was a cold, untouchable noble knight. We had walked these halls in the opposite direction. Now, she was my comrade in arms and future wife. The irony of fate struck me deeply. We entered the office, and the Count sat behind his desk, watching us with a playful, scrutinizing gaze. He leaned back, fingers interlaced. "No outsiders here," the Count said. "I've read the reports, but they lack the full story. Tell me, Karl, how did you use such meager forces to take such a large bite out of Harold's strength?" I took a breath, knowing the real interrogation had begun. I started from the beginning. "My lord, it began when I was assigned to Leyon's scout unit near Ashbourne, where I discovered a large Scarn grazing camp in the Black Forest Valley. I detailed the raid, the victory, and the seizure of livestock. When mentioning the slow retreat due to the loot, I took full blame. It was my greed for the supplies that delayed us, nearly causing disaster. I beg for your punishment." The Count raised an eyebrow, a knowing smile flickering in his eyes. He saw through the attempt to shield Leyon, but didn't call it out, merely remarking, "Greed? That doesn't sound like the cautious Karl I know." I remained composed. I proceeded to describe Leyon's brilliant command during the subsequent Solon pursuit. Leyon used the stampeding cattle to disrupt the Solon cavalry's formation. He then led a desperate charge with our heavy lancers. Despite being severely wounded, he rallied the men for a second charge, shattering the enemy's will. I took command only after that, leading the survivors back to Conford. I then recounted the brutal siege that followed. Regarding the final battle, I phrased it carefully. Just as we were locked in a stalemate with the berserkers, Kalin and Sir Loron arrived, causing the enemy to break and flee. The Count tapped his desk in silence. Suddenly, his eyes sharpened. A glorious victory, indeed. But Carl, are you omitting details? Or perhaps embellishing? He leaned in, his tone pressing. I suspect the Solon infantry was already decimated by your men before Kalin and Loron arrived. They merely arrived to mop up, didn't they? You handed them the credit for those 400 kills, didn't you? I felt a cold sweat break out. I hadn't expected the Count to see through our tacit agreement so easily. I lowered my head, neither confirming nor denying. The Count's voice grew cold. Karl von Schmidt, do you know the penalty for falsifying reports and deceiving your superiors? Charlotte stepped forward, panicked. Father, it's not like that. Karl. I stopped her with a hand on her wrist, remaining silent and stoic. The tension in the room was suffocating. Suddenly, the Count's icy demeanor vanished, replaced by a booming, genuine laugh. Ha ha, excellent. Karl, you did very well. The Count stood and clapped me on the shoulder again. To face such glory and choose to share it with allies to cement your relationships, that is true wisdom. I once saw you only as a brave commander who creates miracles, but now, Rochefort's gaze sharpened. Your political acumen far exceeds your age and status. I can only attribute it to the blood of your father, the old Schmidt, a master of power plays. It seems you share his blood. You should discuss these matters with him sometime. I realized the Count's earlier intensity was merely a test. I bowed modestly. You overpraise me, my lord. The victory belongs to all. Conford's survival depends on your support and that of my colleagues. Enough with the formalities. The Count waved me off, clearly pleased. Kalin and Loron will be grateful for your gift. The influence they represent will now owe you a favor, which will greatly aid Conford's development. The Count leaned back in his chair, tapping his desk rhythmically, his expression turning thoughtful. Conford has suffered heavy losses, the Count stated decisively. I will select a group of clean background, volunteer farm youths from Franz City's militia reserve and assign them to you. They aren't as elite as my standing army, but they have basic training in formations and weaponry, which will save you time. He added sternly, take care of them. They are my people and my future soldiers, not cannon fodder. I felt a surge of gratitude. I bowed solemnly. Thank you, my lord. I will treat every soldier as a cornerstone of Conford. I understood the Count's intent. The Count wouldn't provide his own elite troops, as they were loyal only to him. These raw, ambitious militia recruits were different. By handing them over, the Count was effectively detaching them from Franz City to become Conford's direct force. This was both a show of trust and a strategic investment, allowing me to build my own loyal army. The Count nodded. Harold will not let this defeat slide. Once he recovers, he will send elite forces to eradicate your outpost. He pointed to the map. We must prepare. You built temporary camps on your way north, correct? Yes, my lord, I replied. Good. I will send my engineers to fortify those camps into permanent outposts. If possible, we will build a road to shorten supply and reinforcement lines from Franz City. If the Solonians besiege you again, my main force can arrive in a single day. We will catch them in a pincer movement and annihilate them. I was stunned. The Count was integrating Conford into the core of the Northern Frontier's defense system. Your foresight is unmatched, my lord. I don't know how to repay this kindness. My gratitude was genuine. The Count waved it off. Since you gave the credit for the victory to Kalin and Loron, the rewards will go to them. That is the best path for you right now. Business is concluded. You may rest. He gestured for me to leave, treating these major decisions as trivial. But I knew my real business was just beginning. I glanced at Charlotte. Charlotte watched me nervously, her eyes filled with expectation. I turned back to the Count, my voice deepening. My lord, I have one more request. The Count paused, a playful smile appearing. Another one? Speak. Are you eyeing the armor in my vault? I shook my head. It concerns Commander Leyon von Hoek. The Count's smile faded slightly. Leyon? He fought well. I was planning to reward him. He did, I agreed. But he has expressed a wish to me. The Hoek family castle fell to the Solonians, and his father died in despair. He seeks vengeance. He believes he can better achieve his goal of reclaiming his home under my command at Conford. He requests your permission to transfer. I bowed my head, heart racing. The Count tapped his desk, glancing between me and the tense Charlotte. The office grew quiet. Finally, the Count chuckled. Leyon von Hoek. It seems France City can no longer hold this lone wolf. He looked at me. If it is his choice, and you need the help, I grant it. Charlotte, and I exhaled in relief. The Count continued. Furthermore, his remaining cavalry will go with him. They are loyal to him and have fought alongside you. They will serve you well. I was overjoyed. Thank you, my lord. The Count waved a hand. Don't celebrate yet. Their horses, equipment, and pay are now Conford's responsibility. If you bankrupt your town, don't come crying to me. I understand, my lord. I will manage it properly. I replied firmly. Charlotte felt a flicker of disappointment. I still hadn't brought up the one thing she most anticipated. Just as she thought the meeting was over, I turned back to the Count, my expression grave and unusually tense. Charlotte's heart skipped a beat. She stared at me intently. I took a deep breath, looking the Count in the eye. My lord, I have one final, and most significant, request. The Count, about to pour tea, paused, surprised by the persistence of this request. He set down the teapot, observing my intense, determined face. He chuckled dryly. You have many requests today, Carl. Very well, for your service to the north, speak. But this must be the last. I felt a weight lift. The critical moment had arrived. I took a deep breath, looked the Count in the eye, and said solemnly, My lord, my final request concerns my future. I ask for your permission to marry Charlotte Rochefort. The office fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The Count froze, his teacup suspended in midair, his playful demeanor replaced by pure shock. He scanned me and Charlotte, his gaze piercing. I stood tall, enduring the scrutiny despite my racing heart. Charlotte, face burning crimson, clutched her dress, her knuckles white with a mix of shyness and anxiety. The crackling fireplace only deepened the oppressive silence. Finally, the Count set his cup down with a soft click. Leaning back, he folded his hands and asked coldly, Marry Charlotte? Karl von Schmidt, do you realize what you are asking? I am fully aware, my lord. I replied firmly. The Count turned to his daughter, his tone softening but remaining sharp. Charlotte, is this your own wish, or are you under pressure? Charlotte took a breath and met her father's gaze. Her eyes were resolute. Father, this is my choice. I wish to marry Karl. No one forced me. The Count searched her eyes for hesitation, but found only unwavering resolve. He nodded, turning back to me. I admire your courage, but noble marriages are not decided by battlefield camaraderie. He tapped the table. You are the second son of the Schmidt family, and your reputation in Franklin is not spotless. Charlotte is my only daughter. Her marriage affects the stability of the northern frontier and our family interests. He leaned forward. Does Duke Schmidt know? Does this represent the Schmidt family's intentions regarding the north? I realized the Count saw far beyond mere romance. This is my personal wish, my lord. My father and I are distant. This has nothing to do with family politics. Uninformed, the Count muttered, his expression shifting. He fell silent, weighing the consequences. Finally, he made his decision. I understand your feelings, but this is a grave matter that cannot be rushed. He looked at me. Your surname makes this political. I need time to observe. The Count's gaze sharpened toward the northern wilderness. Harold will not let this defeat slide. His next retaliation will be brutal, and Conford will be the first target.